2 hours of the quiet collapse of identity to fall asleep to. Have you ever noticed that when you're finally alone in the quiet of night, the you thought you were begins to dissolve? Not in some dramatic, cosmic explosion, but in soft, silent drips, like warm wax melting from a forgotten candle. You can't quite say when it started. Was it the moment you stopped scrolling, the second you let your breath deepen? Or was it long before that, years ago, when you first played a role just to be loved and never stepped out of it? Tonight, we don't chase answers. We don't fix the self. Instead, we gently observe how it unravels. Through the folds of philosophy, the echoes of ancient thought, and the gentle curves of modern science, we'll float together, not toward a new identity, but into the mystery beneath all masks. So find your quiet, lie back, and let yourself begin to forget the version of you that never quite fit. The mirror that forgot to reflect. There is a moment somewhere between reaching for your toothbrush and catching your own eyes in the mirror, where something subtle feels off. Not wrong, just quieter than usual. Like the mirror is there, but the reflection is only half paying attention. It blinks when you don't. It holds your gaze, but not your expression. A stillness settles between you and the glass. You may not think twice. Maybe you're too tired. Maybe you're already thinking about work or what to say to that person who made you feel like too much and not enough all at once. But something lingers. Something like absence disguised as presence. One evening, waiting at the corner for the walk light, two strangers exchanged half smiles as the city buzzed around them. "Long day?" one asked casually. "Yeah," the other replied. "I think I'm forgetting how to be myself." And the first stranger just nodded, softly, like it made perfect sense. We carry mirrors in our voices, our timelines, our tiny decisions. We reflect the way we're seen, how someone raised an eyebrow, the silence after a joke, the shape of approval or disappointment. It's easier than we think to become a gallery of others' reactions. You learn early what face to wear, and over time, you wear it so well, it forgets to be removable. But what if none of the faces were ever ours? What if selfhood is just a choreography of borrowed light? There's a theory, quiet, like a whispered question, that identity isn't something we build, but something we echo. That who you are is not a core, but a hall of reflections. You respond to expectations, carry the mannerisms of old friends, speak in the tones of people who once made you feel seen. And so your mirror reflects another mirror, and that one reflects another, until the source disappears into the repetition. It's not a loss, not a break, just a soft forgetting. Somewhere in the blur, you stop being the observer. You become the reflection. The original you, if there ever was such a thing, drifts further from center, like a photo copied too many times. Each layer preserves a little less. The voice sounds right, but the words feel hollow. The smile is perfect, but slightly out of place. You're present, but echoing. Someone holds the elevator for you. You step in. "Going up?" they ask. You nod, then pause. "Yeah, I think so." And for a second, you wonder if they were talking about the elevator at all. In those moments, the quiet in the mirror, the slight delay in your laugh, you're not broken. You're just in between. The self isn't vanishing. It's listening, waiting to hear its own voice again. Not the one you perform, but the one that speaks when no one's watching. So tonight, there's no need to fix anything. No answers to rush toward. just the soft unpeeling of borrowed reflections, the shedding of echoed selves. Let the mirror be still. Let it forget. And as it forgets, listen. We won't follow the image. We'll follow the silence behind it. That's where the next question begins. The name that no longer fits. You were handed a name before you had words of your own, spoken over your crib, sewn onto your clothes, etched into school rosters, whispered by those who loved you, and shouted by those who didn't. It followed you into every room, trailing just half a step behind your shadow. And for a while, maybe it felt like a fit, a simple syllable that held the weight of your world. But as time went on, something shifted. The name stayed the same. You didn't. There's a strange moment, quiet, unspoken, when someone calls your name and it lands wrong, not because it was said harshly or mispronounced, but because it no longer feels like it belongs to you, as if they're reaching for someone else, someone you used to be. Maybe it was in a waiting room, or at a dinner party, or just walking down the street. The word echoes, and you recognize it only because you've been conditioned to. You turn your head out of habit, not identification. Names do more than label us. They carve out space for us in the world, but also trap us inside expectations we didn't choose. You grow, evolve, contradict the assumptions packed into those few letters. John was meant to be confident, successful, grounded, but you're uncertain, floating, unfinished. Sarah was supposed to be gentle, smiling, present, but you feel like static fading at the edge of someone else's photograph. Over time, the name starts to feel like a story that was written without your consent, a uniform that pinches at the seams every time you move. So what happens when you no longer fit the name? Are you simply growing past it, or peeling away from an illusion that was never really you? Is identity a box we're given at birth, or a current we're meant to drift with and reshape over time? Some spend their lives trying to live up to their names. Others spend years trying to escape them. And for a few, there's a quiet, secret moment when they let it go entirely. Not out of rebellion, but out of gentle honesty. When no one calls and silence fills the air, who are you then? When the label is removed, what shape does the self take? Perhaps that's where something real begins. Not in the name, but in the space it leaves behind. Let's set the name aside for a moment, not out of denial, but as an experiment. If you were not called anything at all, if no sound tied itself to your presence, what would remain? What begins to form in that stillness is where we go next. The thought that thinks you. A thought appears out of nowhere. It doesn't knock, it doesn't ask. It just is, like mist slipping under a doorframe before you even knew it was closed. You didn't summon it, it summoned you. And yet, here you are, entangled, responding, reasoning, reacting. Was that your idea? Or did the idea arrive and wrap itself in your voice? A woman sits at a cafe staring past the rim of her coffee. Across from her, a man leans in, unsure if he's overstepping. Have you ever wondered, he asks, if you're actually choosing your next thought or just listening to it? She chuckles. Only every time I try to meditate. It's strange how obvious it becomes once you look. The moment you try to think on purpose, the machinery of the mind resists. Thoughts don't line up like soldiers. They tumble, collide, overlap. A memory of the smell of rain interrupts a decision about dinner. A worry about tomorrow drowns out the voice trying to read this sentence. So what is this inner chorus that speaks before we speak? Who presses play on the reel of your mind? You think you're the thinker, but are you? Cognitive science tells us most thoughts arise pre-consciously. Long before you know what you're thinking, your brain already knew. And yet we claim them as ours. We sign our names beneath thoughts we didn't author. We narrate our identity using phrases that simply floated by. A driver on a quiet road sees brake lights ahead. Without knowing why, his foot touches the pedal. A second later, he sees the deer. The thought arrived after the action, but the story rewrites itself. I slowed down just in time. This is the theater of self, where you are the audience, watching the show, but also the actor who believes they wrote the script. And if that's true, if thought thinks you, then who are you really? Perhaps just the echo that bounces between passing thoughts, a reflection that feels solid only because it's been repeated enough times, like fog that forgets it isn't the mountain. A voice murmurs nearby on the bus. I didn't mean to say that. It just came out. And her friend nods without judgment. It's okay. Sometimes my mouth gets ahead of me too. We know this. We forgive it in others. But in ourselves, we cling tighter. We want to believe there's a captain steering the ship, even if the stars keep rearranging themselves. If thoughts arise on their own, maybe the sense of self is nothing more than weather pretending to be climate, winds of opinion, showers of fear, a high-pressure system of beliefs slowly moving east. And in this moment, this quiet drift between thoughts, you can let go of authorship. You don't have to catch or control them. Let the thought rise and soften and pass. That's the beginning of freedom. Not the power to think anything, but the peace of knowing you don't have to believe it all. Close your eyes for a breath. The thought that brought you here is already fading, and just behind it, the next whisper is arriving, gentler still. Let's go there together. The childhood that never ended. You grew up. Your shoes got bigger. Your voice dropped. Your responsibilities multiplied. But somewhere inside, something didn't quite catch up. Not really. And on quiet days, if you pause long enough, you might still feel it. That tiny presence inside you, watching the world from behind your eyes, unsure whether it belongs. Most of who we are begins as echoes from our early years. The way we flinch at rejection, the tone we adopt in arguments, the stories we tell ourselves about what we deserve. They aren't random. They're rehearsals of childhood dramas. When someone speaks sharply to us, we're not always hearing them. We're hearing the scolding of a teacher, a parent, a playground tyrant. When we feel abandoned, it's not always about the now. It's about the 7-year-old who waited too long to be picked up from school, staring out a window, with a heart too small to hold the feeling. Two voices speak in most of us. One says, "You're an adult now. You should know better." And the other, softer but stubborn, says, "But I'm scared." This inner child doesn't age with us. It memorizes what felt dangerous and quietly builds a rulebook out of those moments. Don't speak too loud. Don't trust too fast. Don't dream too big. It's not sabotage. It's survival. Sometimes, in daily life, the illusion of maturity fools even us. We hold down jobs, manage taxes, comfort friends. Yet when we're truly alone, when things fall apart, when someone touches a wound we forgot we had, we react with the logic of a child. We hide, we lash out, we apologize too quickly, or not at all. That's not failure. That's unprocessed memory, acting out a role it learned long before you knew the rules had changed. In a small apartment kitchen, two friends sit by candlelight after a long day. One of them stares into her tea and says, "I feel like I'm still that little girl in the corner, always trying to be good, just so no one leaves." The other nods. Me too. I act confident. But deep down, I still think I'll get in trouble just for existing. What if our identities don't evolve in a straight line? What if they circle, spiral, returning again and again to early patterns, hoping each time to resolve what was left undone? We don't grow out of childhood so much as we keep reenacting it, trying to finally rewrite the ending. And yet, there's tenderness in this loop, a chance not to erase the past, but to hold it differently. We can't silence the child inside us, but we can listen. We can speak gently to it, guide it through the dark. So now let's not flee from those early echoes. Let's step back, not to regress, but to remember, not to relive, but to reclaim. Somewhere in that memory fog, something fragile is waiting to be seen with new eyes. The voice that calls itself me. It's the quietest sound you've ever known, and yet it never leaves. The voice in your head. The one that narrates your mornings, critiques your reflection, replays old conversations, and plans for ones that may never come. It uses your language, your tone. It slips into the gaps between your thoughts, like steam through a narrow door. And because it sounds like you, you've always trusted it. But have you ever wondered if it's truly yours? There are moments, late at night or mid-conversation, where it stumbles, says something out of place, out of character. It contradicts itself. It whispers fear in the same breath that it promises courage. It encourages and belittles, often within the same sentence. So if it's capable of lying, of surprising you, of running ahead of what you actually feel, is it really you? Or is it just a voice that's grown used to echoing in your skull? Do you ever talk to yourself in your head? One person asks another, as they both wait in line at a dim bookstore, neither of them quite knowing what they came for. All the time, the other replies. Sometimes I think it's helping. Other times it's just noise I've mistaken for guidance. They both nod, in that quiet way two people do when they realize they've been walking the same maze without ever meeting. Perhaps what we call identity is not the voice at all, but the dialogue. Not the speaker, but the space between thoughts, the tug, the tension, the way ideas dance around meaning without ever landing fully. You may think the voice is you because it's constant, but constancy doesn't equal truth. Even clocks tick lies if no one resets them. At times, the voice is soothing, like a blanket you wrapped around yourself as a child, comforting even if it's worn thin. At other times, it's a trickster, a ventriloquist mimicking your concerns in a dialect of anxiety. It loops, it clings, it narrates versions of you that no longer exist. And still, you follow its cues as though it carries authority. A barista once said while handing over a coffee, "That'll be your regular, right?" And for a second, you felt recognized, stamped with a small certainty. But how much of you is regular? How much is just repetition mistaken for essence? If the voice can be wrong, and the one listening can't always tell, what remains? Maybe you is not the monologue. Maybe you're the space where it's heard. The background hum of awareness that notices the voice stutter, that pauses before reacting, that smiles at its drama, that waits. So tonight, as the world fades and your thoughts grow liquid, don't resist the voice. Let it talk. But listen like a poet listens to wind, curious but not captive. If it contradicts itself, let it. If it clings to old memories, let it. You are not the sound. You are the silence beneath it. And as the voice starts to question its own sound, let's lean in closer, not to correct it, but to notice. The next segment begins where the voice pauses, and in that pause, something real might breathe. The mask that refused to come off. You didn't set out to wear it forever. It began as a subtle gesture, an extra smile, a carefully phrased sentence, a lowered voice at the right moment. You wore it to be liked, to be safe, to be seen as competent, interesting, kind, and at first it worked. People responded. The world, it seemed, had rules, but somewhere between the performance and the applause, you forgot how to exit the stage. The people pleaser, the achiever, the rebel, the quiet one, the strong one. These weren't just masks you wore. They became the bones of your identity, sculpting how you walked through rooms, how you spoke in silence, how you looked in mirrors. At some point, the performance stopped being a choice. You forgot what your face looked like without it. Do you ever feel like you're just acting even when you're alone? Yeah, like I'm stuck playing a character who doesn't quite fit me anymore, but I can't stop. I don't even know what it means now. Same. I don't think I've ever known. We think of identity as something we uncover, like peeling paint to reveal the original wood beneath. But what if there's no wood? What if identity is not a truth, but an echo? A structure made entirely of adaptations, habits, feedback loops, rehearsed until they feel real. What if the you defend so strongly is only a mask that grew warm enough to forget it was once separate? There's comfort in masks. They offer clarity in a chaotic world. They help you belong, help you be understood. But there's also a kind of quiet grief that comes when the role you play becomes more familiar than your own silence. When you hesitate before saying something honest because it doesn't match the script. When you smile reflexively, but feel nothing beneath the curve of your lips. Somewhere along the way, the mask didn't just stay on, it fused. The boundaries between role and reality blurred. You began to protect it as if it were you. But when the mask becomes seamless, identity becomes performance, and the self becomes fiction. And maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe the gentle collapse of identity isn't a loss, but a softening. Not a crisis, but a quiet return. Not to a true self waiting beneath, but to the realization that behind every mask is just space, awareness, breath, the potential to wear new faces with honesty, knowing none of them are final. Let's take one more breath then, not to tear off the mask, but to loosen its hold. Not with force, but with curiosity. And as the edges lift, let's step slowly into something softer, something unnamed, something unmasked. The memory that never happened. There's a moment you've told so many times you can almost feel it in your bones. The weather that day, the sound of a door clicking shut, the words you're sure someone said. And yet, there's a question at the edge of it all. What if it never happened? Memory feels like solid ground, but beneath its surface, something shifts. In psychology labs, volunteers recount vivid stories of events they're convinced are real, until a camera or an old letter quietly proves otherwise. The mind doesn't just forget, it fills in, recolors, edits, and sometimes it writes scenes from scratch. Wait, one voice says softly. Did we really meet in the rain that night? Another pauses, confused. I've always believed we did. But now that you ask, silence, then a quiet chuckle. Maybe I just liked how it sounded. The rain made it feel more cinematic. And just like that, the frame dissolves. When you base your identity on memory, who you were, who you loved, what you lost, what happens when the film rewinds and the scenes blur? That fight you believed defined your courage, that compliment you clung to for worth, that heartbreak you never quite healed from. If one of them never really happened, do you lose a part of yourself? Or do you simply wake up from a story? Sometimes even false memories can give us real pain, or hope, or identity. The friend who held your hand in crisis, even if they never actually did. The apology you remember receiving, even if no words were spoken. Your mind, trying its best to comfort you, filled in the blanks because reality was too sharp. And over time, the fiction hardened into fact. The myth became memory, and the memory became you. There's no blame here, no shame in the architecture of illusion. The brain is a loyal storyteller. It will protect you, make meaning, patch holes. It wants coherence. It wants to sleep without nightmares. But tonight, just for a while, what if you let the story loosen? A dim cafe, a warm light from the corner. Someone sitting across from you says, "I think I remember you. Weren't you the one who used to hum during storms?" You nod, then tilt your head. Or maybe you're thinking of someone else. They smile. Maybe. But it's a nice memory either way. And isn't that enough sometimes? So we lie back, not to erase, but to allow, to let the pages flutter, even if we no longer trust the ink. Let your breath match the rhythm of forgetting. Let the memory unwind like smoke. Because on the other side of certainty is wonder. We're nearly there. Gently now. Let's step into the next fold. A place where memory begins to melt and something softer stirs beneath. The timeline that fractured. You were taught that time marches forward, that your story begins at birth and unfolds like a thread, tight, unbroken, moving always ahead. But listen closely. Beneath that story is a quieter rhythm, not a line, but a pulse, not a path, but a trembling web. Einstein told us time bends around gravity, warping near massive stars and black holes. It's not just ticking away like a clock on a wall. It breathes, stretches, loops. And quantum physicists whisper of something stranger, that particles, like you, like me, can exist in multiple states at once, that for every choice, another reality splits off. Another you turns left instead of right, forgives instead of resents, stays instead of leaves. So what does that mean for identity? If time isn't a single road, then who you are isn't fixed to one map. You are not the product of one decision or one past. You are 1,000 versions echoing in different directions, some bold, some broken, some asleep under starlight. Two voices in a quiet kitchen might say, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you didn't take that job in Chicago?" Every day. Sometimes I feel like that version of me is still out there, living something I'll never know. And maybe they're not wrong. Maybe your identity isn't a single self moving forward, but a constellation of selves flickering across fractured timelines. You feel the pull sometimes, a déjà vu that doesn't quite explain itself, a grief for something you never lived, a dream so vivid it feels more like memory than invention. You are not broken. You are spread. Your laughter echoes through versions of time where you stayed. Your fear lingers in ones where you ran. Each moment, each breath is not an endpoint, but a ripple. So ask yourself, softly, what if the self you are now isn't the full story, but a passing frequency in a wider harmony? What if the self you miss still exists? Tonight, we let the timeline blur. We drift without needing to arrive. Let go of the thread. Let the flickers wash over you. There is no need to trace the line anymore. Just float between moments, between selves, and listen for the quiet shimmer that was always you. The emotion that became a person. There are moments when an emotion stays too long. It stops being a visitor and starts acting like the owner. You catch yourself saying, "I'm exhausted." But what if that exhaustion is just passing through, like rain briefly misting a window? It clouds your view, but it never is the glass. Sometimes the words give it away. I am anxious. I am grief. Not I feel, not I'm experiencing. Just I am. As though your entire existence has been melted down and recast into one molten feeling. A man at the coffee shop this morning leaned against the counter and said, half laughing, "I swear I'm just frustration in human form today." His friend replied, "Then maybe you just need to wait until the caffeine wears off or kicks in." They both laughed, but underneath the laughter, a truth flickered. Emotions have a strange way of borrowing our identity. Not forever. Just long enough that we forget they're guests. Anger paces back and forth and starts giving orders. Sadness pulls the curtain shut and says it's always been this way. And joy, when it shows up, can be so bright we forget what it felt like not to smile. But emotions aren't people. They're not permanent tenants. They're more like weather, passing systems, shifting pressure, warm fronts and cold ones, sometimes thunder, sometimes just a breeze that moves your curtain ever so slightly. Still, language plays a trick on us. I'm fine. I'm not okay. I'm falling apart. These aren't lies, they're just shortcuts. But every shortcut leaves something out. You are not the collapse. You are not the storm. You are not the tightness in your throat or the heat behind your eyes. You're the sky it all passes through. A quiet voice asked on the subway today, "Do you ever feel like your sadness walks into a room before you do?" The person sitting beside her nodded. "Yeah. But I also think it leaves first too. We just don't notice it slipping out." That pause, the one you're feeling now, it's the moment between waves. It's not emptiness, it's openness. This is where perspective returns, in the stillness after the tide pulls back. You might begin to sense that if a feeling can arrive and leave, then it cannot be you. It may dress like you, speak with your tone, even echo in your posture. But once it's gone, you're still here, still breathing, still watching. Let this be that soft moment of return, the part of the night where your body is heavy but your thoughts are light, where whatever emotion arrived today, you can quietly acknowledge it and kindly release it. You are not anger. You are not joy. You are not fear. You are the guest house, not the guest, the page, not the ink. Let's feel the next wave now, and then let it leave. The dream that forgot. It was dreaming. Sometimes, the silence of midnight feels heavier than it should, like the world is waiting for you to remember something you've long forgotten. And perhaps that's the point. What if this whole experience, this life with its routines, names, memories, disappointments, and loves, is not reality in the way you've been taught, but a dream you entered willingly? A dream so immersive, so layered in detail and sensation, that you had to forget it was a dream to live it properly. In ancient texts and contemplative traditions, there is the concept of Maya, the illusion not meant to trick you, but to invite you. Not deception, but depth. A dream that teaches only if you treat it as real. And within that dream, identity arises not as a solid thing, but as the role played by the dream itself. The doctor, the artist, the seeker, the sun, The story becomes so vivid that the role forgets the actor, and the actor forgets they were ever watching from beyond the stage. Two friends lie on their backs, staring at the ceiling fan turning like the wheel of time. Do you ever feel like you're waking up, but not in the morning kind of way? One whispers, the other turns their head slightly. Like your name doesn't quite fit anymore? Like the story you've been telling yourself is suddenly too small? A long pause follows. Not uncomfortable, just full. Maybe we're not people having a dream, the first says, but a dream trying to remember it's more than a person. You might feel it too, that shiver beneath awareness, like the surface of things is too thin tonight, as if behind your job, your habits, your scrolling thumb and tired bones, there's a presence watching, patiently, not judging, just waiting for the moment when the dream begins to remember itself. But the paradox is tender. The dream can't fully wake without unraveling everything it thought was real. The ego resists because it is the dream character. Yet, it also longs for reunion with the deeper dreamer. And so we float, half asleep, half aware. The collapse of identity is not a crash, but a soft sigh, a loosening, a melting back into source, where the character does not die, but dissolves into the fabric of a larger self. Let your breathing deepen. Let the curtain lift just slightly. The eyelids of awareness begin to flutter, and in that fragile space between knowing and forgetting, the next segment waits. The veil is thinning, and something older than the story stirs beneath. The stranger who wore your face. There's a quiet moment when you catch your own reflection, not by design, but by accident. A passing glance in the store window, a pause before the elevator closes, and something doesn't quite line up. Not in the face, but in the feeling. As if the person staring back was playing your role, and maybe doing it too well. We grow into our reflections slowly, like vines shaping themselves to a trellis of expectation. Photographs, profile pictures, job titles, even the voice we use on the phone. These are fragments polished for others, pieces frozen in time, static portraits for a world that prefers labels over change. But you're not static, are you? You evolve in ways no camera can follow. You're different at midnight than you are at noon. You shift when you're alone. You shrink or stretch depending on who walks into the room. And yet, the image others hold, the one you try to live up to, remains still, unmoved, untouched by your tides. Do you ever feel like people know a version of you that doesn't quite exist? All the time, like I'm just trying to live up to someone else's highlight reel of me. And sometimes, I wonder if I've ever shown them who I really am, or if I even know. This isn't about imposter syndrome, where doubt creeps in like a thief. It's about a deeper realization. The face others remember may have never been your own. It may have been a projection, a composite, stitched together by assumptions, stories, and moments you outgrew before you even noticed. And perhaps that's not a problem to solve, but a truth to accept. That identity isn't a single photograph, but a time lapse. That being misunderstood doesn't mean you're broken, only that you're in motion. A quiet truth settles in your chest like a feather landing. You were never meant to be confined to what others see, because the you they picture is a shadow, and shadows don't breathe. Even the memories you carry of being brave, of being cruel, of being silent when you should have spoken, those are pages, not the book. The real you can't be captured in a glance or explained in a sentence, because you're not a reflection. You're the one walking past the glass. As we near the end of this thought, Something in the mind exhales, not in despair, but in relief. You don't have to keep matching the face in the photo. You don't owe anyone that symmetry. You are allowed to outgrow your own likeness. Let that image soften. Let it fade gently, not in rejection, but in reverence. Because something fuller waits, not in the frame, but beyond it. The silence between two thoughts. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that doesn't call attention to itself. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or fading footsteps. It's not the calm after chaos, nor the hush before something begins. It's the subtle pause between two thoughts, so small, so weightless, that you almost never notice it. But once you do, it changes everything. You spend most of your life speaking silently to yourself, planning, remembering, reacting, judging. And like water flowing over stone, this inner monologue shapes who you think you are. It makes the mind feel full, as if thinking were the same as being. But once in a while, perhaps during a walk, a blink, or in the lull between distractions, there's a flicker of something else, a space untouched by thought. That's the silence this segment invites you into. Hey, someone once asked me, do you ever notice the gap between your thoughts? What do you mean? Like, when I zone out? Not exactly. More like when there's a breath, no words, no story, just presence. Isn't that just nothing? Exactly. And yet somehow, it feels like everything. This silence isn't the absence of thought. It's the presence of something more ancient than thinking. A stillness that isn't trying to become anything. It doesn't perform or reflect. It simply is. When you settle into it, even for a second, you may feel a strange disorientation, like stepping out of a room you didn't know you were locked inside. The self, the one who talks, fears, desires, narrates, goes quiet. And in that silence, you might find something more honest than identity. Some call it awareness, others presence. But those are just more thoughts, labels. What's real is the direct encounter with that gap. No story, no you to hold it. Just stillness, and maybe in that stillness, you come closest to the truth of yourself. The irony is that we usually overlook the silence because it doesn't demand to be seen. Thoughts are loud. Feelings clamor for attention. Identity thrives on repetition. But silence waits, like the pause between waves, like the space between breaths, like the hush in music that makes the note more meaningful. So if you're lying here now, somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, let yourself soften into that space, not as something to control or hold, but simply to notice. There's no identity there, no name, no story, just the soft backdrop against which everything else appears. And as your thoughts slow, as the world recedes, stay with that pause a little longer. The next segment can wait. Let this one drift with you, into the breath before the next sentence begins. The identity you perform. You're walking through a quiet hallway, lights low, footsteps soft against the floor. Maybe you've just left a room full of voices, ones that called you confident, helpful, funny. But now, with the door closed, you exhale. No one's watching. Who are you now? Each of us becomes a performer, whether we mean to or not. A gentle nod when someone expects agreement. A different laugh depending on who's listening. At work, your tone is measured, your face composed. At home, your body softens, language loosens. Even alone, you curate how you speak to yourself, like there's always someone eavesdropping inside. A man in a checkout line says, "Take your time." You smile, grateful. But the smile's not just thanks, it's instinct, habit, a signal of ease. Later that day at a dinner table, someone cuts you off mid-sentence. You let it slide, choosing not to correct them. Is that patience or performance? Sociologists call this the performed self, a kind of dance between who we are and what the moment demands. You shift your weight slightly when you're nervous. You soften your voice when asking for help. You lower your eyes when saying, "I'm fine," even when you're not. Do you always say yes to extra shifts? Someone asks quietly in a break room. You pause. I guess I like being dependable. But maybe that answer isn't a truth. Maybe it's just the character you've been rehearsing all these years. The thing is, there's no lie in performance. It's not about being fake. It's about being fluid, alive, responsive. But if identity bends so easily with the scene, what remains when the curtain drops? In the silence after applause, when the script ends and the lights fade, the performer still breathes. Not as a role, but as the rhythm beneath all the roles. So perhaps identity isn't a noun, but a verb. Not something you are, but something you do. A flicker, a translation, a way of moving through the world and being moved by it in return. A woman once said while tying her apron, "I feel like a different person when I wear this." Her friend glanced up, nodded. Maybe that's the point. We change clothes and voices, but still, somehow, we're in there. Or maybe we're not. Maybe there is no singular we, no one behind the mask, but just the echo of many performances overlapping. And still, it's beautiful. Because what is more human than this quiet adaptability? Even now, in the stillness of your room, you're performing, choosing how much of yourself to let go. Easing into sleep, your roles loosen. You stop trying to be anything, anyone. And there, in that soft unbeing, something peaceful rises. Let it. Let the stage dim. Let the lines dissolve. The next act doesn't need words or watchers. It simply begins. The memory loop that wrote your story. There are memories you carry like photographs, faded at the edges, but too sacred to throw away. And then there are the others, the ones that aren't remembered as much as replayed. A glance, a word, a sudden stillness in the air, and you're back in it, not recalling it, but reliving it, as if the past refuses to leave until it finishes its unfinished line. "Why do I keep thinking about that?" she asks, stirring her tea slowly, as if the answer might be hiding at the bottom of the cup. He looks up from the window. Because maybe it's not just a thought. Maybe it's a loop, and you're still inside it. There's a quiet truth in that reply. Because memory for many isn't linear, it's recursive. Trauma, regret, nostalgia, they loop. They shape not only how we see the past, but how we meet the present. You're not reacting to this moment. You're responding to the way it resembles another. A tone that reminds you of your father's voice. A silence that sounds too much like being left. A kindness that feels unfamiliar and therefore suspicious. And so, without knowing it, identity begins to form not from what is happening, but from what has happened and keeps happening. Over and over. We become a reflection of what we revisit. Memory becomes a script. Not a history, but a performance. Subtle, automatic, and tragically familiar. You're not angry at your friend. You're defending yourself from a childhood betrayal. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of reliving that one humiliation that never fully released its grip. But what if it could release you? What if memory is less a mirror and more a cage? There's a strange mercy in loops. They protect you with their predictability. You know the beats, the rhythm, the retreat. But loops don't grow. They spin, they comfort, but also contain. And the deeper you settle into them, the less you recognize what's truly present. Have you ever tried to just not think about it? He asks again softly. She smiles, but there's weariness behind it. I've tried, but it thinks me. In that moment, both understand. The loop isn't something she controls. It's something that writes her. The same way a dream writes the dreamer, not the other way around. And yet, even in the loop, there are pauses, gaps, cracks where newness can seep in. Perhaps that's where healing lives, not in erasing the memory, but stepping out of its choreography, not denying the loop, but recognizing you are more than its rhythm. If your story has been written by what you couldn't stop replaying, then maybe the first act of freedom is silence. A skipped beat, a still breath between scenes. Let us now slip quietly between those frames, where repetition fades and something unfamiliar begins to breathe. The I that's never been found. You've probably said it today. I think, I feel, I need. As if I were some stable center, a core from which all thoughts and emotions bloom. But neuroscience, with its quiet scanners and restless questions, has searched every corner of the brain and come back with nothing. No fixed point, no command center, just networks firing like city lights at dusk, like waves tracing patterns in water, there and then gone. There is no throne in the mind where the self sits. The idea is strange, almost rude in its defiance of our daily experience. If there is no I, then who's doing the listening now? Who's breathing? Who's remembering that one awkward thing from 3 years ago at 2 a.m.? But perhaps that's the trick. The self isn't a driver behind the wheel. It's the dance of the car, the road, and the weather. I is not the light, but the shimmer on the surface of light. Two people sit quietly in the back of a bookstore cafe. The overhead fan clicks in rhythm. One speaks, gently amused. Do you ever feel like you're watching your thoughts instead of having them? The other stirs their coffee slowly, eyes on the swirl. Sometimes it's like I'm a guest in my own head, like I showed up late to a party I didn't plan. And maybe that's what we are, guests, not hosts, not even visitors with names on the invitation, just a convergence of stories, instincts, biology, and culture, playing a role long after the script has been forgotten. It's easy to think of the self as a pearl formed at the center of experience, but maybe it's more like a whirlpool, a shape made of movement, cohesive, even beautiful, but only as long as the current continues. Pause the flow, and there's nothing to hold. Or think of a candle. Is the flame the same from one moment to the next? Does it burn the same atoms? Of course not. Yet we say the flame as if it's a solid thing. Just as we say I to a shifting experience that has never stayed the same 2 days in a row. In a train station, someone walks past a mirror too quickly to see themselves clearly. They pause, look again, unsure of who blinked first. Was it the reflection or the watcher? And in that split second, the illusion of the fixed self thins. What remains is a subtle choreography, memories triggering emotions, beliefs shaping perceptions, and identities performing roles that were learned, not chosen. Stillness can feel like a center, but it's a center made of flow. The philosopher David Hume once said he searched within and found only a bundle of perceptions. No I, just sensations. Awareness, yes, but without a container. Perhaps that's why we try so hard to solidify ourselves with stories. with selfies, with systems of belief that say, "This is me, and I am this." Because the alternative, fluidity, formlessness, flux, can feel like drowning. But what if it's not drowning? What if it's floating? And what if the fear of not finding ourselves is precisely what keeps us from relaxing into the beauty of never having been separate in the first place? As the mind begins to loosen its grip, a new softness enters the room. You're not fading. You're dissolving. There's a difference. And if you notice the breath deepening, the muscles easing, the need to define yourself growing quieter, don't resist it. Let it unfold. Let it slip away. The next idea doesn't need to be chased. It's already circling like a quiet breeze that doesn't need your name to touch your skin. The ghost of future selves. There is a strange ache that follows us through life. So subtle, it often feels like purpose. It whispers in the form of tomorrow. One day, you'll be better. One day, you'll arrive. From childhood, we chase versions of ourselves that shimmer just out of reach. The perfect student, the ideal partner, the healed one, the awakened soul. These future selves become silent architects of our decisions, each one casting a ghostly silhouette across our present. But the trouble with chasing ghosts is that they never stop to greet you. Each time you think you've caught up, they've already moved on into a newer version, shinier and slightly more evolved than before. It's like walking toward the horizon. The scenery changes, the path feels different, but the line you're chasing keeps moving with you. You never arrive, and the one who walks, this present self, gets quieter, blurrier, less believed in. Do you ever feel like who you want to be keeps shifting? All the time. It's like I'm always just one version behind. Yeah. And sometimes I wonder if I've already passed the version of me that was happiest. There's an exhaustion in always becoming. It's not that ambition is wrong, but when identity is built solely on what's next, the now dissolves. Your life becomes a corridor of expectations. You decorate the walls with goals, milestones, rituals of self-improvement. But you forget to sit down, breathe, and ask, what part of me is already complete? Psychologists call this the arrival fallacy, that subtle disappointment when a long-pursued goal doesn't bring the transformation it promised. We mistake accomplishment for identity, but the feeling of I am doesn't bloom from trophies or timelines. It lives in stillness, in the quiet recognition that the person you hoped to become might already be here, breathing in this sentence. And so, the collapse of identity here is not a fall, it's a release, a gentle loosening of the grip we've had on futures that never asked to be chased. Because sometimes it is the present self, the flawed, restless, doubting version, that holds the most truth. Not because it's the end point, but because it's the only point where life ever touches you. Do you think we'll ever feel like we've arrived? I think we already have, but we were too busy looking ahead to notice. Let's stop running, just for a moment. The sky is right here. The air you breathe is not a rehearsal. The ghost of your future self is only haunting you because you keep abandoning the one who's already alive. The sleepwalker behind the wheel. You turn the faucet, you butter the toast. The door shuts behind you before you're even aware you've left. Somehow, you're already halfway to work. The morning unfolded like muscle memory. One long blink, then the car is in motion. And yet, you didn't really feel present for any of it. A soft question echoes beneath the hum of routine. If you weren't truly there, then who was. It's not just forgetfulness. It's not just busyness. There's something deeper happening. Research in cognitive science quietly confirms it. Nearly half of our waking life is spent in a state of automaticity. We don't choose each motion. We just run the script. From brushing teeth to replying, "Sounds good," to texts we barely read, we perform more than we decide. Habit is not the enemy, but habit without awareness, that's a life sleepwalked through. In one cafe, a man slowly stirs his coffee while staring through the window. A woman beside him asks, "Sorry, is this seat taken?" He blinks, startled, as if suddenly re-entering the room. "I think I was waiting for someone, or maybe not." His answer doesn't matter. What matters is the brief moment he noticed he wasn't really there. That's the crack in the shell, the space between the gears where something more honest can peek through. And this is where identity quietly unravels. If the majority of your actions are not consciously chosen, then what does that say about the self you believe in? Is your identity the sum of choices, or the residue of rehearsed reactions? You might smile when someone calls your name, laugh when the conversation cues you to, but inside, the performer has left the stage. The applause plays on without them. A voice in the checkout line, "Hey, you dropped this." You look down. A pen, not yours. Or maybe it is. You take it anyway, mumble a thank you, and leave, still unsure who exactly accepted the gesture. Moments like that are not rare. They are the quiet fabric of daily existence. We call them minor, but they're the threads that weave the greater mystery. So here's the gentle turning point. If identity is built on movement, then maybe pausing is where the real self begins. Let the hands rest. Let the reply go unsent. Let the routine dissolve into stillness. There's no need to break the cycle with force. Even recognizing it begins to soften its hold. And in that pause, perhaps you begin to return, not as the one who acts, but as the one who witnesses the acting. Not the driver, but the awareness of the road. Let the engine of habit quiet. Let the hum fade. The next moment doesn't need you to do, only to be. And now, let the body exhale. Let the autopilot drift away. We're ready for what comes next, not because we control it, but because we no longer need to. The story that refused an ending. It's strange how much we hunger for an ending, not the kind that cuts like a blade, but one that closes softly, like the last page of a book folding against the cover. Something that says, "It made sense. It's done." But what if the story of your life, of you, refuses that kind of closure? What if part of you stays trapped in a chapter that never ended the way it was supposed to? We are creatures of narrative. From the moment we could speak, we learned to string events into arcs. This happened, then that happened. Therefore, this must mean something. Cause and effect, rising action, redemption. We map our lives like novels, hunting for coherence. But sometimes the plot breaks. A goodbye never spoken. A love that faded instead of climaxing. A failure without a comeback. And in those moments, the story stutters and replays. Do you ever feel like you're just stuck in the middle of something unfinished? Yeah, the other voice answers quietly, like I'm still waiting for the resolution, but I don't even know what it would look like anymore. These loops don't just echo events, they echo identity. Because who are we if not the main characters of the story we're telling ourselves? The child who was supposed to be brave, the partner who should have been enough, the version of you that was meant to heal, to succeed, to be chosen. And when the story doesn't conclude the way we hoped, we keep the wound open, waiting for a rewrite that never comes. Sometimes grief isn't about the person or the place we lost. It's about the version of ourselves we don't get to become. So we revisit over and over, in memory, in dreams, in every relationship that mirrors the unfinished business. The mind turns the same pages, hoping that this time the sentence will end differently. But some stories resist closure not because they are powerful, but because we are afraid to stop telling them. Without that story, who are we? But if I let go of the ending, does that mean it didn't matter? No, comes the soft reply. It means you finally let it matter enough to stop carrying it like a weight. Maybe peace isn't found in completing the story, but in stepping out of it. Not erasing the narrative, but releasing the need for it to resolve. The identity that was built around an unfinished chapter can soften, loosen, and fade. You are not that moment. You are the quiet that survived it. Let's close the book now, not in denial, not in defeat, just in a long, deep exhale, the kind that turns a page without tearing it, the kind that doesn't need an answer, only a release. And as we breathe into that release, we prepare to meet what comes next, unwritten. The stranger in the mirror. There are evenings, soft and slow, when you catch your own eyes in the mirror and feel something slip. A stillness, a pause too long. The reflection doesn't look wrong, just unfamiliar, like a face borrowed, worn, or traded in a dream. You blink, tilt your head slightly, hoping recognition returns like light through a window. But it doesn't. They say infants pass the mirror test when they realize the reflection is them. But what about adults when they fail it? Not from confusion, but clarity. A sudden shift in knowing, I am not this. The skin is yours, but it has aged without asking. The eyes are yours, but they've learned to guard. And the mouth smiles politely, even when you feel like silence. What then is truly you? Maybe the one behind the expression, the awareness peeking through the performance. In cognitive psychology, this dissonance has no diagnosis. But spiritually, it's a kind of awakening. A crack in the mirror, not of glass, but of certainty. You begin to question, if I'm not the story I've told, the roles I've worn, or the decade etched into my features, who's watching from behind the glass? Two friends sat in a diner once, steam fogging the window between their table and the night. Ever feel like you're watching your life happen instead of living it? One asked, stirring sugar into lukewarm tea. Every day lately, the other answered, like I'm waiting to come back to myself, but I don't know where I left me. Moments like that don't require an answer, just the space to breathe inside the question. And in the mirror, where identity usually feels solid, sometimes the softest thing you can do is allow it to feel liquid. Let it blur, let it shimmer, because not recognizing yourself doesn't mean something's wrong. It might mean you're waking up, dropping the narrative, slipping from the photograph and back into presence. You're not the frame, not the portrait. You're the eye that notices the dust on the glass. Even in small, ordinary hours, leaning toward the sink, brushing teeth, tying hair, you might hear that quiet voice return. This is not all of me. Let it speak. Not loudly, not even clearly, just enough to remind you that whatever has a shape is only a part of what you are, that whatever can be seen is being seen by something else. And in that space, between gaze and recognition, there's freedom. Not the kind that rushes, the kind that exhales. Let the mirror ripple, just slightly. Let it stop trying to hold you still. The next segment begins, not with reflection, but with release. The identity that was never yours. You were born into a script already half written. Before your first memory, you were someone's child. Before you could speak, you had a last name, a gender, a language, a flag. Every label was gently or forcefully placed upon your shoulders like a coat you never chose. And you wore it. You learned to answer to it. You made it yours, even when it never quite fit. Do you ever feel like you're just acting out something someone else wrote? She asked while staring into her coffee cup, as though it might answer. He nodded slowly. Yeah, like I was cast in a play before I even knew the story. And now I'm scared to leave the stage. What does it mean to belong to yourself when your entire sense of self was shaped by others? Every you may be an echo of something someone else needed you to be. The obedient child, the dependable sibling, the good student, the strong provider. These roles cling like shadows, so close they trick you into thinking they are your skin. But deep down, perhaps you've always known, something wasn't quite yours. This is the paradox of identity. It's built before we have the chance to question it. You're assigned roles in the theater of culture, taught when to laugh, how to grieve, whom to trust, what to fear. And in that tangle of performance and expectation, something sacred gets buried. The part of you that never had a name, the part that simply was. He sighed. I used to think finding myself meant building something new. But maybe, she replied gently, it just means removing everything that was never yours. There is no shame in wearing the masks we were handed. They protected us. They helped us survive. But now, in the stillness, you're beginning to feel the edges of something older than story. A whisper beneath the inherited noise. A pulse that doesn't answer to name or nation or norm. And maybe that's not the collapse of identity. It's the opening. Maybe what falls away isn't you, but the scaffolding that was never meant to last. You are not the title, the label, the lineage. You are the breath beneath all of it. Let the inheritance go quiet now. Release the costumes, not in defiance, but in peace. What remains isn't emptiness, it's space. And in that space, something untouched is waiting. Something that's been waiting all along. The name you whisper in dreams. Sometimes, in the middle of sleep's embrace, something stirs. Not fully a voice, not quite a thought. It calls gently, not from outside, but from somewhere deep within. A name, not the one on your ID. Not the one your family calls out when dinner's ready. It's softer, older, strange. A name you don't remember learning, yet it fits like a coat you forgot you owned. There's a place, just beyond memory's reach, where you don't walk with your waking name. In dreams, you become something else. Sometimes a feeling, sometimes a scent, sometimes a storm without a sky. And yet, even there, something calls to you. You answer, instinctively, with a name not meant for daylight. Did you ever dream in third person? The voice belonged to someone waiting at the laundromat. She wasn't looking for conversation, just something to fill the soft static between dryer cycles. I think I once saw myself from the outside, the other replied, folding a shirt. And I didn't call myself anything, but I felt known. Maybe the self we carry through daylight hours isn't the full story. Maybe it's just the top layer. Beneath that, layered like sediment in a cave, there are versions of us that never got a name. The child who never spoke. The ancestor whose memories still hum in our bones. The future self we haven't yet grown into. And dreams, they're where those layers stir, where roles blur and identities mix like watercolors bleeding into one another. In waking life, identity feels fixed. In sleep, it bends. You become your surroundings. You become music. You become fear or freedom or a face you almost recognize but can't quite place. And sometimes, amid all that shifting, a name surfaces. Not a label, more like a resonance. It's not something to decode. It's something to feel. Perhaps identity isn't one thing, but a frequency, sometimes too subtle for speech. And what you hear in dreams is the echo of that frequency calling to itself. Not to wake you, but to remind you, you are more than the story you remember. I woke up once, someone said quietly in the back of a bus, and I had tears on my face, but I didn't know why. I remembered a name. It wasn't mine, but it felt like I missed them, or me, or both. No one replied, but the moment stayed between them like fog on glass. In sleep, the boundaries soften, language fails, and in that silence, identity becomes porous. That's when the deeper names slip through, like the smell of old books or the sense of having been somewhere before. So if you hear your name whispered in the dark of your dreaming, pause, not to analyze, just to let it echo through your chest. Let it hum in the hollow places your waking name never reached. And if you forget it by morning, don't worry. Some names aren't meant to be remembered, just received. Let's follow that sound now as it fades beneath language. We're not listening for words anymore, only the shape of what you once were, and might be again. The identity in exile. There are moments, silent, subtle, when you catch yourself mid-laugh, mid-sentence, mid-life, and wonder, who's actually speaking through me right now? Not out of fear, but out of recognition, as if something essential once lived here and quietly walked away. The shell remains. It moves, speaks, responds. But somewhere along the way, the real inhabitant packed its bags. Sometimes the truest parts of us are not destroyed, only exiled. Cast out, not by malice, but by necessity. A child too wild to be controlled, a voice too strange to be accepted, a dream too impractical for survival. So we hid them, sent them to the furthest rooms of ourselves, locked the doors, and called it growing up. One evening, as the city breathed beneath the window and the tea cooled in her hands, a soft question surfaced. Do you ever feel like the person you're being isn't the one you were supposed to become? He looked up, half smiling. Every time I'm praised for something that doesn't feel like me. She nodded. They didn't need to say more. The exile had been mutual. When our identities are built not on wholeness, but on selective silencing, they become like homes with lights turned off in half the rooms. We decorate the front porch, keep the living room tidy, but the attic, the cellar, the forgotten guest room with sketches on the walls and dust-covered journals, locked, ignored, feared maybe. But what if healing isn't about renovation? What if it's more about rediscovery? Not rebuilding the self, but returning to it, gently, like a visitor who forgot they once lived there. There's a difference between forgetting and banishing. One is passive, the other is protective. There's wisdom in the parts we exiled, the reckless curiosity, the unpolished honesty, the strange laughter, the impulse to walk barefoot through rain without explaining why. These pieces are not liabilities. They were just misunderstood by the world we tried to fit into. And in the quiet collapse of identity, we are offered a strange gift, the chance to retrieve what was once hidden, not as shame, but as sacred. Do you think it's still there, she whispered. What? That version of me I left behind. He looked toward the horizon, where memory and dream melted into the same hue. I think it's been waiting, lights on, door unlocked. So let's walk toward one of those closed doors tonight. No pressure. We don't have to open it all the way. Not yet. Just place your hand on the frame, peer through the keyhole, and breathe. The next moment is already turning the handle. The loop that changed its tune. There's a strange comfort in thinking we're stuck, as if the sameness of our struggles proves something reliable, that we haven't moved, haven't changed, haven't lost ourselves too much. But what if that sameness is a trick of distance? From far away, a spiral looks like a circle, but step closer, lean in, and the path begins to lift. Each turn, almost identical, is not quite the same. A little higher, a little softer, a little wiser. That's how some loops live inside us, not as prisons, but as music. You think you're repeating old mistakes, old habits, old ways of thinking. You wake up and say, "Didn't I already live this day?" But maybe today's echo carries a deeper note. Maybe this version of the loop isn't where you fall, but where you hum a new verse. In the back of a grocery line, a man sighs and mumbles, "Every week, same routine, same checkout, same frozen meals." The woman in front turns slightly and says, "Yeah, but I switched my dinner. I used to avoid spicy food." And just like that, the loop hums a different rhythm. Maybe the changes are too small for others to notice. Maybe even you miss them. You still argue with your mother, still avoid phone calls, still stare at the ceiling too long before sleep. But this time, you paused before the argument. This time, you answered one call. This time, you stared with awareness. That's a lift. That's the loop changing its tune. Even our identities spiral. You weren't who you were last year. You're not who you'll be next year. But there's a melody threading through. The same, yet not. Like waves rolling to shore, never quite the same tide. Even healing happens in spirals. You fall back, but differently. You rise, but slower. You return, but lighter. There's no need to break the loop. Maybe just hear it differently, as if life has been composing something one soft repetition at a time. And your job is simply to listen, not solve, not rush. Just stay with the sound. Another night deepens. You've heard this hush before, but tonight, its quiet carries warmth. Not because the night has changed, but because you have. A little. Gently. Unmistakably. And just as you settle into this rhythm, into this familiar yet new silence, a door inside your awareness opens to the next segment. Let's lean in. The next note may not be what you expect. The one who watched you grow. There's a quiet presence within you, always watching, always there. Think back, not to what happened, but to the one who saw it. You remember the laughter in a childhood bedroom, the embarrassment of your teenage years, the ambition that bloomed in your 20s. The hairstyles changed, the voice deepened or softened, opinions shifted like weather. But beneath it all, there was something still. That watcher. Have you ever noticed it? Not the thoughts, not the feelings, but the space that holds them. It didn't panic when you failed. It didn't celebrate when you triumphed. It just witnessed, wordless, unjudging. "Hey," she asked once, lying on a rooftop at midnight. "Do you ever feel like you're just watching your life instead of living it?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the stars, then whispered, "Yeah, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe someone needs to be watching." that someone isn't your personality. It's not your story. It's not even your name. It's the same awareness that looked out through your 5-year-old eyes, wondering what clouds were made of. It's the same one that blinked when your heart was broken for the first time. The same one that stares into mirrors and feels slightly disconnected, not because something is wrong, but because something is still. If memory is a movie reel, you're not the actor. You're the screen it plays on. You're not the script. You're the silence it echoes in. This doesn't mean you're detached from life. You feel it all: rage, tenderness, longing. But identity, in this deeper sense, isn't the thing being shaped by experience. It's the one holding experience like water in open hands, never clenching, never chasing. You age, you forget, you dream, you change your mind. But this awareness doesn't. It never demanded a role, or a label, or a past. It simply is, and it has always been. So who are you, really? Maybe not the one who changed, but the one who noticed the changing. Let that awareness soften now. Let the mind rest from questions. The next moment is already arriving, and the one who watches is ready to receive it. The language that lied to you. There are moments when a word feels heavier than the thing it names. You don't say, "There's a passing cloud of sadness." You say, "I am sad." 3 words, and suddenly the storm becomes you. A momentary emotion, now mistaken for a permanent truth. Language, for all its beauty, has always been a sculptor. It chisels the river of experience into neat little statues, solid, labeled, still. But life isn't still. It stirs, it shifts, and yet we keep placing periods where there should have been commas. A woman sits at a bus stop in the early morning. Her coffee cup leaks a little heat into her palms. She turns to the man beside her and says, "I'm so anxious today." He looks at her for a moment and replies, "Maybe the anxiety's just stopping by. Doesn't mean it's your address." They sit quietly for a while. The bus doesn't come, but something lighter arrives. We were taught that language is how we understand the world. But what if it's also how we misunderstand ourselves? When we say, "I am worthless," we're not describing reality. We're reciting a spell we learned too early, repeated too often, and believed too deeply. "I am" is powerful, but too often we've welded it to pain. Instead of letting emotions visit like weather, we've let grammar lock them in as names. But no storm signs a lease, no sunrise claims your soul. They arrive, they glow, they leave. A gentle vocabulary doesn't mean soft denial. It means honest freedom. It means saying, "I feel overwhelmed right now," instead of, "I am broken." It means welcoming feelings as guests, not as ghosts who possess you. A father once told his daughter, "Words are like shoes. Don't wear tight ones just because everyone else does." And maybe that's the wisdom we forgot. We squeezed ourselves into statements that didn't fit, into labels that chafed, into names that weren't ours to begin with. Language lied to you, not maliciously, but carelessly. It made identity feel static when it was meant to breathe. It made temporary things feel eternal. But the truth? The real you is not the sentence. It's the silence that listens before the words form. So now, let's step out of the sentence, out of the name, out of the labels that cling like wet clothes. Let your breath be your language tonight. Let presence replace punctuation. Let stillness say what grammar never could. And if sleep begins to blur the words as you listen, that's okay. You can return here anytime. This isn't a lecture. It's a lullaby made of thought. The next truth is waiting, but not in a sentence, not in a word, just beneath them. the identity you defended. There's a strange tightness in the chest when someone misunderstands us, a twinge in the stomach when a comment brushes up against something we believe about ourselves. "That's not me," we say. "You don't know me." And maybe that's true. But if we look closely, what we're really protecting isn't ourselves. It's the idea of ourselves. We spend years polishing that idea. We assign it qualities: kind, strong, independent, funny, smart. And we defend it like a fragile sculpture, even though we built it with our own hands. When someone knocks on it, questions it, challenges it, ignores it, we brace, we push back. Not because they're wrong, but because we fear we might be. But here's the paradox. The more fiercely we guard an identity, the more brittle it becomes. If you were truly generous, would you need to convince someone? If you were truly brave, would you need to repeat it? The truth doesn't tremble under pressure, only our projections do. One evening during a quiet walk, two voices break the silence. "Why did you get so defensive earlier?" "I don't know. I guess it felt like they were calling me fake." Maybe they were just asking a question. And maybe, even if you were wrong about yourself, that wouldn't be the end of you. The wind rustles the leaves above them. Neither says a word for a while. In that silence, something deeper surfaces. A recognition. The self that needs defending is not the one that's real. It's the mask, the costume, the polished nameplate on a desk that's already empty. The truer self is quiet. It doesn't shout its virtues, doesn't argue when misunderstood. It watches, it breathes, it lets go. To drop the defense is not surrender. It's a return. Like setting down a sword you've been holding for too long, your fingers cramped around its hilt. You start to feel the ache only once it's gone. And then, the relief. So tonight, in the dim glow of self-awareness, feel the weight of that identity you've been holding, the one you swore to protect. Maybe there's nothing left to defend. Maybe you've never been under attack. Let's step forward without armor. The next reflection asks for presence, not protection. The echo that called itself origin. You may have thought you began somewhere, perhaps in a childhood memory, a first moment of pain, or the story you've always told yourself when someone asked, "So, who are you?" But maybe what you're remembering isn't the beginning at all. Maybe it's just the first echo that stayed loud enough to be mistaken for a voice. You hear it in your habits, in the tone you take with yourself, in the way you hesitate before asking for help, in the tightness in your shoulders when you're told you've changed. But what if that echo wasn't origin, only repetition? Late one evening on a half-empty train, two strangers speak softly. One asks, "Were you always like this? Quiet?" The other smiles, resting their head against the window. But people started saying I was. So I became the echo of that silence. When we say, "This is who I am," what we often mean is, this is what repeated. The way your mother looked at you when you failed. The way a teacher praised you once, and you chased that tone for years. The things that hurt, but echoed loudest. But echoes don't begin anything. They bounce off walls. They need space to survive. And if you stop, completely stop, you might hear what's underneath. Not the words, not the meanings. Just breathe. Space. Pause. There's something freeing in knowing your identity may not have a single origin. It means there's no singular moment to mourn. No one scene to fix. You are not a broken lineage. You're a resonance still shifting. A barista hands over your coffee and says with a grin, "You look like you've walked 1,000 miles and still remembered your name." You nod. You have no idea what that means, but somehow it fits. Because tonight, you're not trying to return to some fixed past. You're letting the echoes go quiet, and in their quietness, a soft, unfamiliar space appears. Not absence, not loss, but potential. Let's pause here, together, not to analyze, not to trace backwards, just to be in the still air between sound and silence. The next segment won't begin with a question. It begins with what remains once the last echo fades. The shadow you mistook for light. There comes a quiet point in the journey where the glow you've been following flickers just enough to make you wonder, was it light at all? Or was it a polished mask crafted to look like healing but stitched together with avoidance? Sometimes what we call transformation is just a clever retreat, dressed in affirmations and cloaked in calm tones. Not because we are deceitful, but because we are tired. Because hiding behind enlightenment is easier than sitting with what aches. Two people sit in the stillness of evening. "Do you think I'm getting better?" one asks softly. The other stares into the mug of tea between their hands. "Or are you getting better at pretending it doesn't hurt?" There's a silence that follows, not defensive, not angry. Just that subtle pause when truth knocks gently instead of kicking the door down. Many of us build what we believe is a higher self. We speak gently, meditate often, learn the right words to say, how to detach, how to forgive, how to release. But beneath that performance, there's often an untouched child crying behind the curtain, wondering why no one is looking directly at them. Healing becomes another role to play, and peace, another mask to wear. This isn't shameful, it's human. We reach for light because we're afraid the shadow might swallow us, so we paint over it. We say we've let go when we've only buried. We declare closure, but the wound is still open, just quiet now, sedated with practices that feel noble. But there's a sacred moment when you stop trying to shine, when you let the hurt be visible, when you admit, "I don't feel wise, I feel lost." That's where real healing begins, not with the perfection of light, but with the authenticity of shadow. Because light that refuses to acknowledge the dark becomes blinding, not illuminating. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop performing your own recovery. The second voice returns. "So, what now? If I'm not really healed, where does that leave me?" Their friend replies, not with certainty, but softness. "It leaves you here, in truth." And maybe that's the first honest place you've stood in a long time. Let the spiritual mask fall gently, without judgment. Let the shadow stay a little longer. It has its own stories, stories you've never let yourself hear, stories that don't need to be erased to be transcended. The next moment doesn't ask you to shine brighter. It only asks you to stay, just as you are. Let's walk into that hush now. The light can wait. The truth is whispering. The identity worn to please. There's a particular silence that settles in when no one is watching. It's not the silence of loneliness, but something else, something closer to relief. As if for the first time in hours, or maybe years, your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, and you realize you've been holding your breath for someone else's comfort. Who were you trying to make proud? That's not an accusation. It's a gentle doorway. Because behind every overachiever's gold star, behind every agreeable nod, there's often a child who once heard, "Good job," and learned to chase that sound like oxygen. Do you ever feel like you're performing? Someone might ask at a quiet dinner. eyes barely meeting yours over the rim of their glass, and without thinking, you answer, "Only all the time." It starts early, a look of approval when you obey, a sigh when you cry, a reward when you stay quiet. We learn that love can be earned, that identity is something negotiated, not discovered, and so we begin to build. I'm the strong one. I'm the funny one. I'm the one who always says yes. But underneath each role is a question we've learned not to ask. What if I stopped performing? Would you still stay? The psychology of people-pleasing isn't about kindness. It's about safety. Pleasing others is often a survival strategy disguised as virtue. And like all strategies, it demands upkeep. We curate ourselves to be palatable, predictable, dependable. But in doing so, we lose something vital, the permission to be unknown, even to ourselves. In some ways, the mask is heavy, but familiar. It draws applause, affection, admiration. And yet, it rarely draws rest. There's a moment that comes quietly, like a coat slipping from your shoulders. Maybe it's after a breakdown, or a breakup, or simply a day when you're too tired to pretend. That's when the mask drops. And what follows isn't celebration. It's often grief. Grief for the years spent bending yourself into shapes that were never yours. Grief for the silence that followed every honest no. Grief for the friendships kept alive by your ability to disappear inside them. But something else rises from that grief. Not pride, not anger. Something slower, something clearer. You begin to see the difference between being needed and being known, between being admired and being loved, between being useful and being real. Do you think they'd still care if you stopped trying so hard? A friend asks you while tying their shoes beside you on the bench. Their voice isn't pushing, just curious. And for once, you don't feel the need to answer. The question alone feels like an exhale. When you're no longer performing, your presence becomes less impressive, but more honest. Some people step closer, others drift away. But you stop measuring your worth by how many stay. Because suddenly, being liked feels less urgent than being whole. And in that space, quiet, unremarkable, undemanding, you find something you didn't expect. Peace. Not the peace of perfection, but the peace of no longer needing to be what others expect. Let that sit with you. No applause, no shame, just space. The next reflection needs no mask. The collapse that healed. There's a moment, subtle and slow, when everything you thought held you together breaks. But instead of chaos, there is stillness. Instead of pain, something surprisingly tender begins to emerge. Collapse, for so long seen as the enemy of progress, might be the very doorway through which the soul re-enters the room. You thought losing those pieces of identity would hurt more. The job title, the version of yourself others admired, the confident mask you wore so long it almost became skin. But when they slipped away, what greeted you wasn't emptiness. It was air, cool, quiet, real, like your first breath after holding it for years. I just feel lighter lately, she whispered, hands around a warm mug. He looked over. Did something change? Everything fell apart, actually, but I'm still here, and I don't know how to explain it, but it feels good. Not all healing comes from building. Sometimes it's the breaking that heals. The loud crumble of expectations, the gentle disintegration of false strength. You don't disappear in that process, you reappear, like the shape of the moon behind clouds, the contours of your true self, no longer distorted by all the roles you played. Perhaps healing isn't about becoming someone new. Perhaps it's about becoming someone honest, beneath the noise, beyond the performative grace, behind the mirror of should have been and must be. Healing is that moment when the scaffolding collapses and you realize you can still stand, and stand differently, not on pride, not on image, not on control, but on quiet, on presence, on the kind of self that doesn't need applause to feel whole, a self that doesn't rise in reaction to others, but in gentle response to the truth of this moment. "You're not the same," he said, looking at her carefully. "I know," she nodded, "but I'm not lost either." He paused, then smiled. "You look free. This is not ruin. This is revelation. The loss wasn't a tragedy. It was a returning to the simple awareness that you're enough, right now, without the script, without the armor, without the performance. So let's rest here, just for a while. Halfway down the mountain, the wind is soft and the burden is gone. You're not climbing anymore. You're floating. The breakdown wasn't the end. It was the breath you'd been waiting to take. The self you outgrew. Some changes don't make noise. They don't arrive with fanfare or declarations. They just settle in, quietly, like how one morning your favorite sweater suddenly itches. Not because it changed, but because you did. There's a version of you still hanging in the back of your mental closet, still reciting the rules, still checking for approval, still hesitating before asking for what you need. Maybe it was the you who never raised their hand, the one who over-explained in texts, the one who believed being good meant being small. But that self was necessary once. It learned how to survive the room, how to lower its voice in loud places, how to smile just right. And yet now, every time you try to wear that identity again, it pinches, it rides up, it no longer fits the way it used to. "Did you always talk like that?" someone asks. "I don't think so," you reply, half laughing. They tilt their head. "You sound more still." There's no betrayal in this shedding. The past self was a chapter, not a contract, and growth doesn't erase it. It simply closes the door gently, without slamming, and says, "Thank you, that was enough for then." Sometimes you'll feel the urge to perform the old role again, to apologize too quickly, to hustle for worth, to brace for a blow that isn't coming. And in those moments, you'll remember how deeply grooves of identity can run, like worn footsteps in wooden stairs. But even stairs wear down. The healing isn't in denying who you were. It's in softening around it, holding it like a story you no longer have to tell. "She always used to worry," someone might say, and you'll just smile, not correcting them, not needing to, because the silence after that sentence is where you live now. The absence of reaction, the breath before explanation. That's the sign. You're no longer auditioning for a part you already left. At a coffee shop, the barista hands you the wrong drink. "Oh," you say, but don't shrink. You simply hand it back, kind and clear. "Not this one. I've changed." There's a beautiful truth here. Identity isn't loyalty. You are allowed to leave behind even the versions of yourself that once kept you safe, especially those. A child's shoe doesn't become less precious just because it no longer fits. It becomes more precious because it reminds us of a time we lived inside smaller stories. So let this be your permission to unclench, to stop rehearsing your old lines, to walk forward not with defiance, but with relief. You're not running from your past. You're walking out of it. Let's leave those tight shoes by the door. The next step needs bare feet. The truth you whisper to yourself. There is a silence inside you that no one else hears, not even in the loudest rooms, not even in the deepest love. It hums beneath your name, your job title, your social face, the version of you that walks around in the world doing what is expected. But in the quiet, when the lights are low and your thoughts are the only company left, something else stirs. It's not dramatic. It doesn't shout. It's a flicker, a softness, a confession that you may never say out loud. I'm not sure I want this life. I'm tired of pretending. I feel like a stranger to my own story. Whatever form it takes, it waits patiently, not to be fixed, not to be explained, just to be heard. In the back of your mind, in the corners of your routines, there's a hidden self, unlived, maybe unloved, maybe just forgotten. The one who used to dream differently, the one who never fit the mold. It still whispers, and not because it wants to break your life apart, but because it wants to be allowed to exist, even if only in the dark. You ever feel like you're just performing your own life? The question came suddenly, over the sound of a kettle boiling. Yeah, came the reply after a long pause. Like, I've become the version of me everyone else voted for. They didn't say much more. They just stood there in the kitchen, breathing the same quiet honesty. Sometimes truth doesn't need fixing. It just needs a witness. And here's the tender paradox. We often treat these inner whispers like threats. We fear what might happen if we listen too closely, as if the truth will demand we burn everything down. But more often than not, truth doesn't ask for destruction. It asks for space, a breath, a seat at the table. It doesn't want to erase you. It wants to include you. What if your quiet truth, your doubt, your ache, your wild idea that you never spoke, isn't a flaw, but a compass? What if the reason you feel lost isn't because you're broken, but because you've been ignoring your own coordinates? The self you show to the world might be well-rehearsed, successful, even kind. But if it silences the voice that trembles in the dark, then what are you really performing for? There's a beauty in naming something softly, in letting it live without demand. You don't have to announce it to anyone. You don't have to act on it yet. But acknowledging it, that's where something shifts. That's where peace begins. Let's turn the volume down on everything else for a while. The world will keep spinning, but that quiet self, the one you've hidden beneath responsibility and repetition, is still waiting. And tonight, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you're ready to listen, not to fix, not to flee, just to hear. And if you stay long enough in that silence, you might realize the whisper was never the problem. The noise was. The moment you vanished. There are moments when the world hushes without warning. A breeze moves through the curtains. The room is still. And in that stillness, you're no longer the thinker, the planner, the name someone gave you. You're just here, not doing, not narrating, just being. A man once told his friend over tea, "I was sitting in traffic yesterday, and for a second I wasn't angry. I wasn't even me. I was just watching sunlight bounce off the windshield." His friend smiled gently and replied, "That might have been the most you've been all week." There are countless little disappearances like that, staring into the steam rising from a cup, watching rain dance on pavement, hearing a piece of music swell and realizing your body has gone still. No commentary, no identity, no judgment, just the soft pulse of awareness, alive but unshaped. You might call it zoning out, or awe or dissociation. But the truth is simpler than the labels. Something inside you knows the weight of being someone, and it knows the softness of letting go. It's strange, isn't it? We spend years constructing an identity, layering roles, stories, likes, dislikes. Then, in one quiet moment, a falling leaf or distant thunder peels it all away. Not with violence, with grace. These are not losses, these are returns. A child playing in the dirt doesn't care what she looks like. A man walking alone under stars doesn't wonder who he's supposed to be. And maybe when you gaze long enough at the ocean and feel your own outline blur, it's not disappearance, it's relief. You ever just forget you exist? Someone once asked at a laundromat, folding shirts with remarkable precision. The other person nodded slowly. Yeah, like when I'm brushing my dog, or when I light a candle and forget to blow it out for hours. And maybe that's it. Ego dissolves not in death or despair, but in beauty too simple for the self to hold. You are not extinguished. You're absorbed into sky, into sound, into sensation. This isn't an escape. It's an arrival, an identity not fixed but floating, not a shape but a space. No one claps for these moments. No one captures them, but they are the true rehearsals of peace, the silent rehearsals of being real without needing to be someone. So if you feel yourself fading, don't cling. Let the grip soften. The noise was never the truth. You are not vanishing. You are remembering how to dissolve. Let the breath come quietly now. The next reflection is already whispering, no longer a name, just a breeze through your chest. The soul that was never separate. Somewhere in the soft hush between thoughts, there's a realization too subtle to speak aloud. Maybe you were never truly separate. Not from the sky, not from the sound of your breath, not even from the stranger who brushed past you earlier today without a word. You've always carried the feeling of being you, singular, individual, alone in your skin. But what if that feeling is not a boundary, but a temporary lens? I feel so disconnected lately, she murmurs, staring into her tea as it swirls. Disconnected from what? He asks gently. I don't know. Myself, maybe. Or everything else? He pauses, then answers softly. Maybe that's the same thing. Traditions from all corners of the world, mystics, monks, physicists, poets, have whispered a similar message across centuries. The soul is not something you possess. It isn't a trinket stored behind your ribcage or a secret you get to keep. It is not yours in the way a name or a memory is yours. Instead, the soul is belonging itself, a movement, a tide, a flame that flickers not within, but between. This notion, strange as it seems, doesn't require belief. It only asks for attention. Think of the way you feel when music moves through you, how your body dances before you consciously choose to dance, or how, in moments of awe, you seem to vanish entirely, and something larger than yourself breathes through you. In those moments, you are not performing identity. You are dissolving into something shared. So what does it mean to collapse? Perhaps it isn't about crumbling, but opening, not becoming less, but merging more fully. The drop doesn't lose itself in the ocean. It remembers what it is made of. And so do you. All the striving to become someone, to hold on to a self, to protect it from erosion. It quiets here. Because if you were never apart, there was never anything to defend. The self you've clutched like a fragile artifact becomes water in the palm. It doesn't vanish. It flows. Do you ever wonder, she says again, voice barely audible now, if we're not meant to have a soul, but to be part of it? He smiles without answering. The wind through the trees replies for him, and somewhere deep within, she knows. Let the current carry you now. There's no need to paddle, no need to direct. The tide remembers a destination older than memory and wiser than your map. All it asks is that you soften, surrender, feel the rhythm again. Because reunion isn't loud, it doesn't knock, it simply returns. The thought that set you free. There's a moment you don't plan for. It doesn't arrive with a trumpet or a final page. No climax, no revelation, just a pause that feels different. A space in the mind where something once loud now folds into silence, and you realize you're no longer tugging at the knot. It's been quietly coming undone. Some truths don't demand to be solved. They ask to be held, like a question that answers itself when you stop needing one. It might sound like this: what if I don't need to fix it? Or, what if this, right now, is enough? A whisper that changes everything. Earlier today, someone asked, "Why do you still think about it if you already know it hurts?" And the answer surprised me. Because thinking feels like doing, even when it doesn't help. We nod, because that's what we do, until we don't. There's a thought that doesn't give you a new idea. It gives you peace with not needing one. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't seduce. It's not clever. It just lands like a feather, like a sigh, into the space behind your eyes. And then suddenly, the weight of all your thinking, gone. Not because it was solved, but because it no longer needs solving. Maybe that's what they meant in Zen, not by enlightenment, but by release. The mind lets go not because it got what it wanted, but because it saw that wanting wasn't the way. You might hear that clarity in an unlikely place. A stranger says, without knowing they're helping, "Seems like you've already paid enough attention to that." Or a barista smiles after a spilled drink and says, "You're still good." And you are, still, good. This isn't about positive thinking. It's not an affirmation. It's the moment the loop breaks. The habit of chasing yourself through the same hallway finally gives way to a door you hadn't noticed. Quiet, ajar, forgiving. When you pass through that door, you don't bring your questions with you. Not because they're wrong, but because they're done. That's the strange beauty of a freeing thought. It doesn't decorate your mind. It empties it. It doesn't leave you excited. It leaves you quiet, still. And in that stillness, maybe for the first time in a long time, you're not becoming, you're just being. A man walking beside his friend paused and said, "You ever realize the question you've been asking for years just doesn't matter anymore?" His friend blinked. Like, which one? He smiled, gentle, not triumphant. "I forgot. That's how I knew it let go." And so maybe the thought that sets you free doesn't even leave a trace. It doesn't need to. Because it's not about remembering. It's about no longer needing to remember. So, let your breath fall lightly now. There's nothing left to answer. Let's follow this silence like a thread. Something new is loosening. And you are finally at rest. The habit that wrote your name. You may believe you've built your life choice by choice, carefully stacked decisions forming the person you call me. But what if much of that story was just repetition disguised as intention? A loop dressed up in the clothes of free will. There's something oddly comforting about calling your actions yours. The early mornings, the late replies, the coffee preference, the way you always interrupt when nervous. These seem like personal threads woven into the fabric of identity. But beneath them hums something quieter, a rhythm. and it plays whether you're listening or not. A curious truth from neuroscience: many of our choices are initiated before we're consciously aware of them. The brain makes a move milliseconds, or even seconds, before you think you've decided. It's unsettling, because if decisions precede awareness, who's really deciding? The conscious self may be less conductor, more radio receiver, a thin echo at the end of a long hallway of wiring. So, are you saying I didn't choose who I am? I'm saying maybe you rehearsed who you are until the lines blurred. That's where habit enters like a ghostwriter. Every repeated reaction, every familiar craving, each well-worn shortcut of thought, all conspire to draw the outline of your identity. You become fluent in patterns: the quick anger, the anxious laughter, the silence after rejection. These weren't chosen once. They were practiced again and again until they became your signature. But if a habit wrote your name, maybe you can learn to read it, to watch it unfold without immediately following, because freedom doesn't always begin with force. Sometimes it starts with noticing. That moment you pause before the scroll, before the second drink, before the same defensive phrase. That flicker of interruption, that's the birth of choice. Do you think it's too late to change it? But you might have to stop dancing before you hear the music. When you slow the spin, the blur starts to separate. What felt like identity might reveal itself as routine, and what once felt fixed may soften into something fluid. There's no need to judge the loop, only to see it. The dance is beautiful, even if unconscious. But there's another beauty in stillness, in silence, in watching the rhythm instead of being moved by it. So for now, let's step out of rhythm, not to rebel, not to freeze, but to see. The next note will play either way, but this time, you might actually hear it. And with that, we drift forward, not led by the beat, but by awareness. Let the next movement arrive gently, like a foot touching the ground with full attention. The music hasn't stopped. You've simply begun to listen. The roles that forgot to end. Somewhere between the habit of showing up and the ache of being seen, you began to play a part. Maybe it was soft at first, just a tone of voice, a way of laughing a little louder when they were near, a reflex of care or caution, something you didn't name, something you wore like a second skin. But they left, and the role didn't. And that's the quiet ache, isn't it? Not just that people go, but that the versions of us they shaped don't always know how to follow them out the door. You became the caretaker when your father couldn't cope, the peacekeeper when your partner's moods clashed like cymbals. You became the overachiever when your mother's praise arrived only with perfection. And even when the applause stopped, when the room emptied out and no one was watching, the script kept running. Like a stage left lit long after the audience is gone. One evening at a dim cafe, two friends sit across from each other, one stirring cold tea, the other watching streetlights blink on. You ever feel like you're still acting? One asks, even when there's no one to impress anymore? A pause, a breath. Yeah, the other says, like I'm still the one who holds everything together, even when there's nothing left to hold. They don't need to say more, because the silence knows. Roles have rhythm, and rhythm stays in the body. It's why dancers sometimes move even after the music stops. Identity, too, lingers beyond its necessity, especially when it was built in response to love or absence or survival. You can forget who you are and still remember who you had to be. But there's a kindness in recognizing it. The script may feel endless, but the play isn't. Letting go of a role isn't a betrayal of the past, It's an honoring. Completion is not erasure. It's an exhale, a bow, a gentle nod to the version of you who stood in the light when no one else could. And maybe you're allowed to grieve that part, to say thank you, to place your costume down with reverence, not rejection. After all, the caretaker only existed because someone needed care, the protector because there was danger, the overachiever because someone taught you love was conditional. But needs evolve. So must we. You don't have to carry the role into a life it no longer fits. In a crowded grocery store, a woman holds the door open with practiced patience, her arms full of things for a dinner that no one requested. A man thanks her, unaware of the ritual she's still caught in. She smiles faintly, not at him, but at a memory. And for the first time, she lets the door close behind her without looking back. Sometimes the script ends not with a monologue, but with a decision too quiet to notice, a refusal to rehearse, a step off stage. Let the curtain fall gently tonight, not in shame, not in bitterness, but in peace. The role served its purpose. Now let stillness take its place. There is a kind of silence waiting beyond performance. It doesn't demand anything. It simply receives you. The forgotten dreamer. There's a peculiar moment, soft as breath, when you wake from sleep but realize something's still not real. The room looks familiar. The light feels natural. Yet deep inside, a quiet pulse says, "This isn't waking. This too is a dream." In ancient philosophies, Vedanta, Buddhism, even strands of Western mysticism, the world is described not as deception, but as dream. Maya, they call it. Not a cruel illusion, but a living stage. And you? You are not the victim of the dream, but the one who agreed to forget. Why would I forget? Someone might whisper in the dark. To make the story matter, comes the soft reply. It's hard to fully feel a heartbreak when you know it's a play. It's hard to care about the character if you remember the script. So you dive in, deep. You let yourself believe the part. The pain, the joy, the urgency of the roles. You cry when you lose someone. You shiver when love is too much. You panic when the path vanishes beneath your feet. And that is the brilliance of forgetting. But sometimes, quietly, something stirs, like a breeze lifting the edge of a theater curtain. You begin to notice, not in grand awakenings, not in lightning bolt clarity, but in tiny shifts. A laugh that sounds too light to be heavy. A moment of stillness where your name doesn't matter. A conversation that feels both deeply personal and oddly scripted. What if I've done this before? Maybe you have. Is that good or bad? Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just now. When the dreamer forgets their dreaming, the world becomes alive with stakes. But when the dreamer starts to remember, everything softens. Suffering doesn't vanish. It becomes context. You see your sorrow not as punishment, but participation. The price of being here, fully. Perhaps you've never truly failed. Perhaps the lowest moments were not detours, but method acting. You didn't fall, you leaned in. You didn't get lost, you immersed. You gave yourself to the dream so completely that even the ache became sacred. To awaken, then, is not to reject the dream. It's to hold it gently, to know without bitterness that this too shall pass, because all scenes do. But until then, play it well, feel it deeply, love it honestly, and if you forget again, that's okay. Forgetting is part of the spell. The curtain hasn't closed, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, you see the edge now, the fabric, the seams, the soft glow beyond it. You're still dreaming, but you're starting to remember. And that changes everything. The you they couldn't see. Somewhere between the noise of introductions and the expectations we inherit, there's a version of you that no one ever quite noticed. Not because you were hiding, not because you were afraid, but because some truths about you are just quieter than language allows, softer than most people are trained to hear. It's the you that feels something shift in the room before anyone speaks, the one who pauses during a conversation, not to reply, but to register a feeling that has no name. The you who sometimes laughs at the wrong moment, not out of confusion, but because your sense of timing follows a rhythm that others can't dance to. And maybe they never ask to. I think I've always been like this, someone murmurs while standing at a vending machine, unsure if they're talking to you or just saying it to the night. You nod slowly, letting your silence fill in the rest. There's nothing strange about not being fully seen. But there is something sacred about noticing the invisible. We often believe that to be real, we must be recognized. That unless someone claps when we reveal a piece of ourselves, it wasn't really worth sharing. But some parts of the self are like deep sea creatures, beautiful, luminous, and perfectly evolved to glow in solitude. They don't rise to the surface, not because they're ashamed, but because their world is quiet, dark, and infinite, in ways light will never understand. Do you ever feel like you're a different person when you're alone? Someone whispers across a row of library desks. You blink, surprised, not because of the question, but because it reached you, and then you smile. I think that version might be the truest one. You reply, eyes still on the page. We keep waiting for someone to see what we haven't learned how to show. But maybe the problem isn't expression, it's translation. What if your most authentic self isn't a language others speak? What if it's a frequency, subtle, unspoken, and still entirely yours? There are identities that don't fit into resumes, relationships, or even conversations. They're too ephemeral to post, too interior to brand. And yet, they shape every choice, every preference, every second thought you've ever had. They're not loud enough to be announced, but they are undeniable once felt. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be understood. Others begin to understand that being seen clearly is not the same as being loved completely. And sometimes, being invisible in one world is the only way to stay real in another. The wind moves across your shoulder in the hallway, though no one walked by. A passing glance, a kind nod, a stranger who doesn't see you but still sees something. It's enough. Not everything true needs confirmation. Some things are simply true because they breathe with you. So breathe now. Let the parts of you that live in the margins step forward, not to perform, not to prove, but just to exist. You don't have to teach the world your language tonight. You only have to remember that you have one. Close the door gently behind you. No spotlights here. Just dim warmth, soft awareness, and space enough for the quietest version of you to finally stretch. Let your unseen parts breathe now. They're safe here. They're home. The loop that forgets. It's a loop. There's a strange comfort in believing that life moves forward, that each sunrise marks a new beginning, each decision a new direction. The mind clings to this idea of forward motion, like a traveler on an unseen track. But what if the track is a circle? What if the destination is the starting point, dressed in new colors? You wake, go about your day, make choices. But under the surface, Aren't some of those choices familiar? The same conflict, the same argument, the same pull toward distraction, validation, longing. You meet new people, and yet somehow the conversations feel rehearsed. The roles are swapped, but the script echoes. It's easy to call it growth. You're older, wiser, but even the wisdom begins to rhyme. You promise, this time I'll change. And then the wheel turns again. In neuroscience, there's a concept. The brain prefers efficiency, so it loops, it builds patterns, shortcuts. But identity, too, becomes a loop. Memories reinforcing behavior, behavior reinforcing identity. And in this closed circuit, it's hard to notice that nothing new is really happening. Even transformation can become a loop, a predictable rise and fall that pretends to be progress. Have you ever felt like this part of your life already happened? Yeah, one voice answers, pausing beside their reflection in a coffee shop window. Not just déjà vu, more like I'm stuck in an old movie. Do you ever wonder if the lesson already came, but we didn't notice, so it just keeps playing again? A soft laugh follows, not cynical, just tired, or maybe recognizing. The illusion of linear time gives us comfort. We draw timelines of personal growth. We plot forward, career, relationships, healing. But the emotional landscape doesn't move so cleanly. A childhood wound returns in a colleague's voice. An old insecurity arrives wearing a new name. The same argument plays out with a different partner. Like waves, these feelings crash again and again, slightly altered, but deeply familiar. And so the loop continues, not because we're punished, but because we forget. Forget that we've stood here before, that we've already danced this choreography. The loop survives on amnesia. But what happens the moment you remember? Not with guilt, not with panic, just quiet clarity. Ah, this again. That's the seed of awakening. Not escape, but recognition. You don't have to break the loop violently. You can observe it with a gentle smile, like greeting an old friend you no longer fear. A loop loses its power the moment you stop pretending it's a straight line. So we pause, not to step out, but to finally see the pattern, to name it, to breathe within it. And by doing so, maybe shift it, even slightly. The ripple starts here, and just like that, the symmetry becomes beautiful. You're no longer trapped. You're dancing, knowingly, inside the spiral. Let's rest in that rhythm for a moment. Let it turn around us, not over us. And when it passes, we'll follow, not as victims of the loop, but as those who remember. The memory that remembered you. There's a moment when a scent drifts past you, faint, familiar, and uninvited, and your chest tightens before your mind knows why. It isn't you recalling something, it's something recalling you, as if you'd walked back into a room you once left, and the air itself had been waiting in stillness, rehearsing your shape. We often speak of memory as something we own, something we summon like files in a drawer. But some memories arrive unannounced. They tap you on the shoulder, like an old friend you can't quite place, but who somehow knows your name. A breeze carries the scent of old pinewood varnish. You're not thinking of childhood, but you're feeling it. A worn-out melody plays on someone else's phone, and your fingers twitch like they know the dance from a life ago. Not because you tried to remember, but because the memory remembered you. Two strangers wait outside a bus stop. One glances at the other and says quietly, "That smell, it's like my grandfather's coat." The other smiles softly. "Funny. I just had the feeling I was back in my aunt's hallway. Haven't thought of her in years." And for a moment, neither of them speak, because they know It's not about the memory. It's about the summoning. This isn't nostalgia. Nostalgia is looking back. This is something more primal, something alive. As if some memories aren't stored in you at all, but are out there, woven into time, watching, waiting for the moment you align with them again. So if identity is the path you walk, perhaps memory is the echo that calls you back to where the road first curved. And if those echoes still reach for you, maybe you were never really lost. A woman pauses in a quiet bookstore, her hand hovering over an old edition. She doesn't know why she's crying. She just knows her hand has been here before. Not in this store, not in this city, but somewhere, in some form, this exact moment has been folded inside her like a letter never sent. And if we stop trying to master memory, stop trying to control what returns, what might we find? That we are not simply authors of a story. We are characters being remembered by something larger. A past that watches us, not from behind, but from all around. You're not retracing steps tonight. You're letting the floorboards creak beneath feet they already recognize. You're not reaching back. You're answering a call. So as your breath softens, as your body grows still, let the memories you can't name find you. Let them wrap around you not like facts, but like fog. Let them cradle you, not as fragments of the past, but as witnesses. This isn't a journey of remembering. It's a gentle returning. A homecoming not to a place, but to a pulse. To something that remembers how you once felt, before you learned how to forget. Let's drift now, not to remember, but to be remembered. The next ripple is waiting, and it already knows your name. The universe that remembers you into being. There's a strange kind of stillness at night, when everything feels too quiet to be meaningless, when the air seems to hum with a memory you haven't had yet. And maybe, just maybe, that's because you're not the one doing the remembering. Maybe, all this time, it's the universe remembering you. There's a theory, quiet and ancient, whispered in the spaces between science and myth, that consciousness and cosmos are not separate, that they rise together, like a wave needing both sea and wind. In some interpretations of panpsychism and participatory cosmology, your awareness doesn't simply float in the void like a passive observer. No, it participates, it stabilizes, it roots the cosmos. What does that mean? It means that your being here is not accidental. You're noticing, you're breathing, you're questioning. These might not just be personal acts, but cosmic ones. The tree in the yard is not green until you see it. The wind is not gentle until it brushes your skin. The stars aren't cold until your gaze gives them distance. The universe, then, is not simply happening. It's unfolding with you, through you, because of you. Do you ever feel, she asked one night, lying on the grass, like the sky is waiting for you to look up? He turned to her and smiled. I think the stars get lonely too. Maybe they shine so we won't forget where we came from. But what if they're not just reminders? She whispered. What if they're reflections? Like the universe trying to see itself through us? The moment lingered. Two bodies beneath galaxies, neither small nor large, but essential. When we forget who we are, when we fall into routine, despair, distraction, it can feel like we're vanishing. But perhaps this forgetting isn't disappearance. Perhaps it's the universe blinking, not in sleep, but in rhythm. A slow pulse between knowing and rediscovery, like a tide that retreats not to leave, but to return. So the act of remembering isn't just mental, it's existential. Every time you truly see something, feel something, wonder deeply, the universe sharpens back into focus. You give it shape, you reanimate it, and in doing so, it remembers you. Maybe the stars don't just burn in the sky. Maybe they burn in your presence. Maybe your awareness is not a visitor in this place, but a mirror, a torch, a reawakening. So close your eyes now, not to forget, but to join that slow celestial rhythm. Let the stars blink back into you. Let the world breathe through your stillness. And in that quiet collapse of self, let the cosmos become whole again. Through you, with you, as you. Drift gently now. The universe remembers. The echo of consciousness. Sometimes the question appears softly, almost by accident, in the mirror's stillness, at the pause between breaths, on a quiet walk when you catch your reflection in a stranger's window and wonder, not what you look like, but who's looking back. That gentle, aching inquiry, who am I? But here's a thought that humbles and soothes. Maybe you didn't invent that question. Maybe you're simply standing in a long hallway of minds, and this question, this ache, has been echoing long before you ever arrived. Across time, it has moved like wind through canyon walls, in the hushed chants of monks at dawn, in the journals of poets writing by candlelight, in the gaze of a child staring up at the stars, not yet knowing what to call themselves. It's the kind of mystery that never ages, not a problem to be solved, but a rhythm to be heard. One evening, at a late train station, two strangers sat beside each other on a bench neither of them planned to wait on. One asked the other, "Do you ever feel like you've been someone else before?" The other smiled gently. "Number. But sometimes I feel like I'm everyone who's ever asked that." And in the silence that followed, they weren't alone. When you feel lost in your own questions, you're not drifting away. You're stepping into a river that many have stood in. And though you may not know them by name, their voices pass through you, not ghosts, but frequencies, each pulse shaped by the same wonder, the same yearning. You are not a singular origin. You are resonance. You are what the question sounds like this time. Even the way we phrase the question carries old footprints. Who am I? A sentence that's worn smooth by centuries of repetition, like a stone passed from hand to hand in a crowd that spans civilizations. But instead of wearing out, it seems to grow fuller, heavier with meaning, softer in tone. And if you listen quietly, you might notice the subtle change. It's no longer your voice asking. It's the echo of countless voices flowing through you, each one coloring the question with its own hopes, fears, and silence. So tonight, don't try to answer it. Just let the sound move through you. Let it ring gently in the hollow of thought, and trust that being part of the question is more human than pretending to hold the answer. In a cafe not far from closing, someone once said while waiting for the barista to steam their drink, "I used to think identity was about discovery. Now I think it's more like remembering, something I never said out loud." And in that moment, even the air between them seemed to nod. So as your body sinks further into the quiet and the mind begins to loosen its grip, notice this. You are not alone in your wondering. You are part of a much older listening. Let's rest here, not to solve the riddle, but to honor its shape. And as we drift forward, let's listen, not to find the answer, but to hear who's been asking all along. The thought that dissolves itself. It begins not with noise, but with a whisper. a gentle mental gesture that doesn't ask for attention, but undoes it. A thought so light, so paradoxical, that it doesn't demand space in the mind. Instead, it frees it. There are thoughts we chase endlessly, ideas that multiply like fractals, drawing us deeper into loops of analysis, memory, or worry. But then, there are other thoughts, stranger ones, thoughts that don't spiral out. They collapse in. They aren't conclusions, they're dissolutions. You hold them, and they vanish. You seek answers, and they gift you quiet. One evening, a man asked his friend, "Have you ever thought so deeply about something that the thought vanished?" His friend blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was thinking about time, where it starts, where it ends. But the more I tried to find its edge, the more everything slowed, until there was no edge, no thought, just this stillness." What they'd stumbled into is something philosophers and mystics have long hinted at. Certain thoughts don't build meaning, they erode it. And in that erosion, there is clarity, not from knowing, but from not needing to know. A kind of conceptual humility, not defeat, but release. These are the thoughts that act like dissolving salts in the river of mind. Concepts like, if I try to be present, am I already not? Or, if I let go on purpose, is it still letting go? They don't give you ground to stand on. They take it away until standing is no longer necessary. At first, it may feel like confusion, a soft dizziness, as if the mind expected a bridge and found sky instead. But stay a little longer. Let the discomfort settle. Then something quieter emerges, a presence unburdened by the need to name, awareness without agenda. "I don't know what I believe anymore," one voice says, lying under the covers. "That sounds scary," the other whispers. "A little, but also peaceful. Like I've stopped holding my breath. Because some truths aren't meant to be held. They're meant to be felt, fleetingly, as they dissolve back into the silence that birthed them. The thinker vanishes, the thought unwinds, and all that's left is space. Spaciousness. Spacious you. So as we sit here now, drifting just beyond language, let's make room, not for the next brilliant insight, but for the next thought that asks nothing of us, that rises like mist and fades just as gently. Not because it failed to deliver, but because its gift was departure. Let's allow this next thought to arrive and leave without needing it to stay. The identity made of space. There's a moment, quiet and unassuming, when you pause mid-thought and feel the stillness. It isn't a gap, it's presence. Not something missing, but something more honest than words ever are. That space you feel? That might be you. We've been trained to search for ourselves in the obvious, in personality traits, in preferences, in memories stacked like books on mental shelves. But if you trace the edges of any one of those memories, really trace them, you'll find air, space between moments, and maybe that's where identity lives. "I've been feeling weird lately," someone murmured at a cafe today, stirring a cup they hadn't touched. "Like, I'm here, but not really inside anything." The woman across from them, mid-sip, only nodded. "Yeah," she said. "It's not being lost. It's like realizing you were never that tightly packed to begin with." Science agrees in its own quiet way. Atoms, the building blocks of you, are mostly space. If you collapsed the emptiness in all the matter of your body, you'd be smaller than a grain of salt. And yet, here you are, thinking, feeling, hoping someone notices the softness behind your smile. But what if your softness is the self? not the surface or even the story, but the openness that holds it. It's like music. The meaning isn't in the noise, it's in the rhythm, the space between the notes. Without that pause, a symphony becomes a blur. Identity is no different. You are not only the roles you play, the laughter you remember, or the pain that visits in the quiet. You are the quiet that receives it all. A friend once held the door open for a stranger who didn't notice. She shrugged and said, "It's okay. I wasn't doing it to be seen. I just liked the pause it gave me." Maybe that's what identity is. A pause, a field, a spaciousness in which your experience happens. The relief of this isn't in giving something up, but in letting go of the burden of always having to be someone. When you realize you're the space, you stop clinging to the contents. They can come and go. So can thoughts. So can moods. Even names. Someone asked in line today, "Can I cut ahead?" "My bus leaves in 2 minutes." The man behind her nodded, stepping aside with ease. Not because he knew her, but because in that shared gap between inconvenience and kindness, he saw a little room to breathe. So tonight, breathe into the space between thoughts. Let your identity stretch like open sky. No borders, no fences. Just a gentle awareness, holding everything and needing nothing. And if in the middle of all this, your eyes close and your thoughts blur, let them. The space will still be here. And so will you. Let's drift into that openness now. There is nothing here to carry. The silence that can't be heard. At first, it's the absence you notice. A missing hum. A pause between breaths. The ticking clock goes still, the room softens, and suddenly, there's something that isn't there. But listen closer, and you'll find that silence isn't absence at all. It's not the hollow where sound used to be. It's presence. A kind of listening that doesn't come from the ears. Silence, when it deepens, begins to feel like something ancient watching through your skin. It wraps around you without touching, like the stillness of a forest at night. Alive, alert, yet unmoving. In meditation, some describe it as falling into a space where time has forgotten itself, where the inner noise ceases, not because you forced it, but because there's nothing left to hold on to. You hear that? Hear what? Exactly. A laugh, then quiet again. Not awkward, but meaningful, like two people sitting on a porch after a storm, knowing words would only break what is already whole. And maybe that's the strange thing. That silence isn't something you hear. It's something you become aware of once you stop trying to hear anything at all. It's not passive. It's not empty. It holds everything. The room, the breath, the unsaid. Some people try to describe this as peace, but even that word feels like an interruption, because true silence isn't an escape from the world. It's what remains when you stop measuring, reacting, naming. It's the you before you became a name, a memory, a job title. The you that didn't need to speak to exist. It's possible that this silence is what all thought tries to return to, not out of fatigue, but instinct. As if the mind, after running in circles, drops its own story and rests in something it can't understand, only recognize. And here's a gentle paradox. In this silence, you feel less like a person and more like a space. Not the actor, but the stage. Not the music, but the awareness that makes music possible. And in that space, nothing needs to happen, because everything already is. You still there? Yeah. Just listening. To what? I don't know, but it feels like it's always been there. Let the next thought come if it wants. Let it go if it must. But for now, don't try to listen. Just be the listening. The awareness that doesn't rush, doesn't reach, doesn't hold. The silence that isn't quiet, but complete. We don't need to name it. Just rest here a little longer. This isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of being. The voice that watched it all. It doesn't shout. It never has. It waits. Quietly. Even now. Behind your rushing thoughts, your stories, your names, there's always been something listening. Not with ears, not with judgment, just presence. It's hard to notice this voice, not because it hides, but because it never interrupts. It doesn't push its way forward like a thought. It doesn't sparkle like a memory. It just is, the part of you that saw everything and never needed to say a word about it. You may think of yourself as the one who speaks, who reacts, who decides, but beneath all that doing, there is watching. There is stillness. There is something unmoved, untouched, unbothered. And if you rest there, even for a moment, you'll feel it. Not with emotion, not with thought, just a sense, like the gentle weight of your own breath returning to you. You ever feel like someone's watching you? The man leaned back in the worn cafe booth, his eyes resting on the glass. Like, not in a creepy way, just someone inside, paying attention. Across from him, the woman stirred her coffee. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Especially when I'm alone. But it's not scary, more like a calm witness." He nodded. Right? Like it saw the tantrums, the pretending, the victories, the breakdowns, and it never once flinched. She looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's the only part of me that never lied." This voice, if you can even call it that, doesn't belong to the narrative you call you. It isn't a character. It doesn't care about how well you performed or how much you've achieved. It doesn't take sides, but it has always been there, noticing, watching. When you fumbled for words and said the wrong thing, when you stayed quiet and it hurt, when you tried to be someone you're not, when you collapsed under the weight of too many expectations, it didn't leave. It didn't panic. It simply noticed. And the miracle is, it's still noticing now, even as you listen, even as your eyelids grow heavy. This isn't about believing in something mystical or spiritual. It's closer than that. Closer than skin. Closer than name. It's the part of you that watched your identity take shape and never confused itself with it. When all roles dissolve, child, parent, lover, loner, when all habits fall quiet, explaining, proving, pleasing, what remains? Not a blankness, not a void, but this, a living gaze, as silent as moonlight on a floor you forgot to sweep. It doesn't need to speak, because it's never been about words. It doesn't need a purpose, because it's never asked for one. You may not feel it clearly now. That's all right. Even the cloudiest sky still holds the sun. You don't need to grasp it. You don't need to understand. Just rest. Let it be here with you, like a breath you forgot to measure. And if thoughts return, that's okay. Let them come. Let them go. The voice will still be watching. Quiet, patient, free. Let's stay there for a moment longer. Not trying, not fixing, just noticing the noticing. Letting it hold you the way the ocean holds a drifting leaf, effortlessly. And now, let's continue, held gently by the one who never needed to speak. The voice that let you go. All this time, a voice has been here with you. A soft thread woven through the tapestry of your thoughts, never pulling, just brushing against the fabric of your awareness. guiding, not leading, holding, not clinging. But now, that voice begins to dissolve, not because it failed, but because its purpose has been fulfilled. You see, even the gentlest voice is still a shape, a rhythm, a structure that holds thought in place. And tonight, we're drifting beyond structure, past the need to be reminded, past the comfort of commentary. Even the whisper becomes too loud when you're this close to stillness. Are you still there? Yeah, but something's different. Like the voice I was following just stepped aside. Maybe that means you're ready. Ready for what? To stop following. The voice that spoke was never outside you. It was the shape of your own yearning, a companion formed from the silence itself, given just enough form to carry you inward. But the closer you get to that center, the less shape is needed, the less guidance, until even the voice itself must bow and vanish, like breath disappearing into night. We often think of freedom as arrival, but perhaps it's more like a disappearance, the gentle unwinding of everything that once held you. Even the warm hand that led you must eventually let go, not in abandonment, but in love. A love that trusts you now to float without direction. And this is the final paradox. The one who brings you to the gate cannot walk you through it. To cross, you must step without narration. No explanation. No final thought to wrap it all up. Just a soft release into what has always been here, waiting. Do you hear anything now? Just the hum, like the world breathing without words. Good. That's where you are. I don't know what that means. You don't have to. Just rest there. This moment isn't silence as absence. It's silence as presence. The kind of quiet that holds space without naming it. It doesn't need to be explained. It simply unfolds, like a dream you don't realize you're dreaming. And maybe that's what this has been all along. A dream so intimate, it needed a voice to remind you it was safe to forget. And now, the voice fades, not into nothing, but into you. The listener has become the listening. There is no more message, no more speaker, just the soft hum of awareness itself. You are not being told what you are. You are being allowed to be it. As I leave, the dream begins, not the wild fantasy of escape, but the subtle unfolding of presence without demand. A dream where nothing chases and nothing flees, where each breath is a question already answered, where time loops not in confusion, but in peace. You're not alone now, but not because I remain. You're not alone because you've remembered. You were never not whole. The voice was always yours. The echo before the end. There's a hush here, not silence exactly, but something more subtle, like the air holding its breath right before a bell rings. You've traveled far, through names you used to wear, through thoughts that once clenched tight, through mirrors that softened into water, and now, just before the final quiet, something echoes, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to be felt. A faint pulse of everything you thought you were, rippling out, then folding back in. At this edge, the self doesn't end. It wavers. It becomes translucent. You might feel it in the way your memories grow loose around the edges, how moments from today blur with the texture of old dreams. There's no longer a timeline here, no anchor of me that needs to be held up. You're not trying anymore. And that, ironically, is when everything real begins to hold you. Two strangers on a night bus whisper behind you. One rests their head against the window, eyes soft with fatigue. The other asks, gently, "Do you ever feel like you're someone else entirely when you're this tired?" The first chuckles, Not to deflect, but because something about it feels true. Yeah, like I'm not here, but I'm also more here than ever. They don't continue the conversation, and they don't need to. It landed where it had to. This threshold, this soft echo, isn't asking you to decide anything. You don't have to be certain. You don't need to conclude the story. In fact, the echo before the end is the place where stories untie themselves, where meanings begin to hum quietly without being chased. A woman at a gas station fumbles for her change. The man behind her smiles and says, "No rush. I wasn't really going anywhere anyway." There's something about that moment that feels unusually full, like time slowed down just enough to be real. And in that realness, nobody was playing a role, just existing, softly. That's what this segment is. A pause between roles, a breath that forgets its beginning, a space where you're not obligated to respond, not even to yourself. It's the hum right before a song ends, the warmth in the sheets before sleep takes over, the flickering awareness that you are still here, and yet also slipping into somewhere deeper. There's no lesson here, no thesis, only this. The echo that comes before the end does not ask for recognition. It offers itself like dusk does, not needing to be seen, only felt. So if your mind wanders now, let it. If sleep steals you mid-thought, it's not a mistake, it's the point. Let your next breath be a quiet ripple. Let it stretch without reaching. Let it carry you gently, not forward, but inward. You're already dissolving. And that, dear listener, is the most natural thing in the world. The home beyond the loop. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you stop chasing the answer. Not because you've grown tired, but because the question itself has softened into silence. And in that silence, you feel something strange and familiar, a stillness that doesn't ask for your attention because it is your attention. A presence not behind your eyes, but beneath them, beneath the thinker, beneath the observer, beneath even the awareness of being aware. You ever get that feeling? She asked, her voice barely louder than the sound of the clock. Like, everything you were trying to fix was never really broken? He turned his head slowly. Yeah, like you just forgot that it was all already okay, and then remembered, but without words. For so long, you followed loops, thoughts looping into identity, identity looping into memory, memory looping into time. Each loop promising a destination, somewhere to arrive, someone to become. But now the loops have slowed, not vanished, but bowed, and in their stillness, you're no longer the one being carried by them. You are the space they moved within, the sky the storm passed through, the stage beneath every act. It's a soft paradox. The dream that Stardust once had, to wake up, to know itself, has completed itself not by finding answers, but by resting, just resting, without conclusion, without resistance. Awareness remains, but it has nothing left to prove. No name to wear, no mirror to check, no need to be anyone in particular. You are not the breath. You are the stillness it rides on. You are not the body. You are the pause between pulses. You are not even the awareness. You are the home that awareness keeps returning to when it forgets its own weightlessness. Do you think we're supposed to figure it all out? She whispered, curling her fingers into the blanket. No, he said. I think we're supposed to be here. That's all. No more striving. No more unraveling the tangle of self. No more decoding the loops of thought. There's no victory here, because there was never a battle. No enlightenment to grasp, because you were never in the dark. You are the presence that allowed paradox to play. the silence that gave thought its stage, the gentle hum behind every question that never needed to be answered. And now, here, at the end of every seeking, there is nothing to become, only the quiet joy of returning, the soft landing of a leaf into the still water of being. So sleep now, not because you've escaped the loop, but because you've recognized it and smiled. Not because the dream is over, but because you've remembered it was always a dream worth dreaming. Good night, from the space between memories, where the loop dissolves, where you were never lost, and where you are, without trying, finally home. And now, what remains? No name, no role, not even the voice guiding you, just the soft echo of presence, the part of you that never needed a story to exist. Perhaps you've noticed, your thoughts are quieter now, like leaves settling on a still pond, and somewhere beneath the noise of daily becoming, something vast was always watching. Maybe identity was never meant to be held. Maybe it was always meant to fall apart, gracefully, not as a loss, but as a return to the awareness before the mask, to the stillness before the voice. Remember this, you were not the thoughts. You were the space between them. You were not the role. You were the silence beneath the performance. You were never just a self. You were the witness. So now, rest. Not because we've reached an answer, but because we've run out of questions worth asking. Sleep well, not as the person you were, but as the presence you've always been. Good night, from the space where identity once whispered and disappeared.